Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku, back with another fanfiction. This is the 9th part of What If Vigilante Deku Was Adopted by Aizawa? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Shinsu and Izuku were asked to join Wano once more on Monday morning. Despite his normally stoic facade, it was clear that Shinsu was ecstatic to be in the hero classroom again. His pencil tapped excitedly on the desk, and a small smirk spread across the boy's face as he looked out the window. "It's so odd to see you here in the morning, Midoriya-kun," Uraka-san said happily as she bounded across the room towards his desk. Izuku grinned back at her, turning in his seat to face the girl fully. "Aizawa-sensei asked Shinsu and I to come for a special lesson." "Special lesson?" Kaminari-san asked, tilting away from Sara-san's desk. "Like, this is going to be the strongest thing you ever learn, and it's going to be on the final in 3 weeks. Lesson? Or I have been an absolute pain in class, and want to give you a sweet reprieve from the torture by giving you more torture. Lesson?" Kirishima-san grinned, patting Kaminari-san on the back, jovially. "Those are the same thing, bro." No. The first one means that I have another thing to fail at on the final. The second one means that I could possibly survive the semester," Kaminari-san said seriously. "If you weren't so F-seeking lazy, you wouldn't be having a problem at all." Kakin grunted, swnging his bag at the base of his chair and plopping into it. In an instant, the entire, self-proclaimed Baka squad was surrounding him. "Don't be so mean, Bakugo," Kaminari-san whined. "I do try. I work for hours every night, slaving away at the homework that is supposed to aid me in my studies. It just makes no sense." Kakin snorted and rolled his eyes. Then, the explosive blonde turned towards Izuku. "The FCK you doing here?" he asked, the dark tone setting off every warning bell in Izuku's mind. "Aizawa-sensei asked Midoriya and Shinsu to attend morning classes. Isn't it great, Bakubro?" Kirishima-san cheered, arms snaking around the blonde's shoulders in a side hug. "TCH, great, is not the word that came to mind." Bakugo sneered. "Yo, mind CK," he called, leaning forward to get a view of Shinsu. The purple-haired kid was already glaring daggers at the blonde. "I don't want another detention, so don't FCK with me today." "Got it?" Kakin yelled, pointing angrily at Shinsu. "Wouldn't dream of it." Shinsu drawled with a hint of sarcasm. "So long as you watch your mouth," he muttered, just loud enough for Bakugo to pick up on it. Explosions rang out instantly. A thick smoke curled from Kakin's desk and Kirishima-san's arm, where the rock-strongening boy stepped in to stop the explosion that was aimed towards Shinsu. "Come on, Bakubro, be the bigger man," Kirishima-san laughed joyfully. "You just said you didn't want detention." "Hey," Minasan said, walking in and noticing the scene. "Bakugo," she shouted cheerfully. "I've got this sweet new game I want to show you. Come over here and look." "Why do I have to go all the way over to your desk, DMN Pinky?" Kakin grumbled as he stood. Izuku breathed out a sigh of relief. The Baka squad wasn't half bad, actually. It wasn't like the group of friends that used to help the blonde torment Izuku in elementary school, anyway. Instead, they all seemed ready to step in and be the voices of reason. Minasan even led the explosive blonde away from the source of his ire. Clever. Izuku looked back at Shinsu. "Maybe don't SS start things when ML less than 2 feet from him?" he asked, a small smile forming on his lips. Shinsu smirked but nodded. "Next time, I'll make sure there are at least 2.5 feet. "So, are you like officially in the hero course now?" Mintasan asked, a sly grin gracing his face. "Because, here in 1A, you gotta prove yourself." "Oh geez. What nonsense are you spouting off now, Minta?" Kaminari-san said as he traveled back over, sans the rest of the Baka squad. "I was just letting Shinsu know about the 1A test of courage," Mintasan said, wiggling his eyebrows suggestively. Kaminari-san's eyes went wide and his mouth made an O shape. "Test of sea courage?" Izuku asked, confused. "There's no such thing." Mintasan turned towards the green-eyed boy, smiling bigger. "Of course you wouldn't know about it, Midoriya. You're never really here. In other words, you have to take it too." "I'm here 3D days a double week," Izuku grumbled under his breath. "Well, yeah," Kaminari-san started. "But you missed most of the semester." Shinsu's pretty much caught up to you in terms of attendance. The electric boy grinned and chuckled merely. Might want to watch out, Midoriya. You could have competition. If someone shows up more than you, they could end up being the split-class student. Shinsu is going to be in heroics full-time. Izuku corrected. He just has to finish the semester. Look, that's beside the point, Kaminari-san said. You two have a test to take, Minasan cheered. Both 1C students sighed, but listened in on what they supposedly had to do. Okay, so, this test of courage is really just for guys. Think of it this way. What is the scariest thing that a boy, verging the edge of manhood, can do? Minta asked, eyes gleaming with unadulterated joy. Work among villains in order to take them down from the inside. All while having the chance of being brutally slaughtered if you're caught. Shinsu said seriously. Be battle one-on-one with a VV villain so powerful that even all M might is little more thdh than an ant to the VV villain. Izuku said with a nod of his head. Minasan's face dropped at the answers, and he shook his head. And what? Are you two okay? I'm fine. Shinsu and Izuku said together. Kaminari sighed and patted Minta's shoulder. The struggle with superpowered teenagers. Some just don't understand what it means to be normal. I don't have a S superpower, Izuku pointed out. The struggle with living in a superpowered society. Some teenagers just don't understand what it means to be normal. Kaminari corrected using the same tone. Izuku huffed in amusement. Okay. The scariest thing that normal boys could possibly do is confess to a girl. Confess? Izuku asked. Like their sins? Shinsu snorted at the question. No, Midoriya, take this seriously, Minasan said. You have to confess your feelings. That doesn't seem too scary, Izuku said. Hey, yours Yusen. Yes, Midoriya-kun. The dark-haired girl asked, looking up from the textbook she had been studying. I am feeling relatively content right now. I am glad to hear that. The girl said with a smile. I am also feeling at ease. She then went back to her book. Shinsu actually laughed that time. Minasan's head hit the desk with such force that it actually made Izuku jump. No, Midoriya, no. Kaminari-san grinned like a fool over to the side. Sheesh man, you're almost as bad as Todoroki. If it weren't for your completely confused expression, I'd think you were messing with us. Minasan looked up slowly and sighed. Confess romantic feelings, Midoriya. The shorter boy groaned. Oh, but I don't feel anything romantic towards the girls. Izuku said quietly, face flushing slightly. How stupid was he to miss the obvious meaning behind Minasan's words? Oh, come on. There must be at least one person you are interested in, Kaminari-san said. Anyone from Class 1C? It was Izuku's turn to snort. I'm lucky to get a friendly smile in that class. Okay, how about 1E? That pink-haired chick, Minasan questioned. Hatsune-san? She's nice. But she can be a little too overwhelming sometimes. I only see her as an acquaintance. Or a good workshop partner. Okay, don't you find anyone in Wana attractive? I mean, all the girls in this room are practically smockin', Minasan cheered. There's Yaoyorozu and her voluptuous breasts. Mina with her delectable hips, have you seen her move? Uraraka has a cute face. Oh man, don't even get me started on what a Sui's tongue may be capable of. You should stop before you cross into sequel harassment. Shinsu drawled. It's not normal to think about girls as objects. Minasan snapped out of his drooling fantasy and glared at the two 1C students. Oh come on, neither of you like anyone? I like Midoriya. Shinsu said nonchalantly. Romantically, Minasan shouted. Shinsu shrugged, looking over at Izuku with a raised brow. I just don't go F4 people based on L looks. Izuku said. Their minds are what make a person who they are. That's the important part. Minasan's face lost all hope as he slumped in his seat. You two are hopeless. So, are we excused from this T-test of courage? Izuku asked. Yeah, whatever. It's no fun if you aren't emotionally invested. Minasan moped. Class starts in 2 minutes. Yaoyorozu said loudly for everyone to hear. Students started trickling back towards their own seats at the warning, not wanting to be Aizawa-sensei's target should they not make it to their seats fast enough. This class is way more interesting than 1C. Shinsu said with a grin. I'd take Bakugo over Anzai any day. Speak for yourself, Izuku mumbled. At least ends I can't explode your face. Shinsu had a point, though. This class had a happier atmosphere than 1C typically held for the two boys. Everyone was happily chatting about all the same mundane topics. But this time, Izuku and Shinsu were being included. In truth, the only thing that seemed to be off about the room was the lack of a certain, stern-faced student telling the other students off. The class rule follower Ida was not scolding the students for their less than proper discussions. It was quite strange, even for Izuku, who had attended one a total of 4 whole weeks, thus not knowing the class well at all. The other students certainly noticed Ida's quiet contemplation too, as some students moved directly over towards him to continue their discussions, almost begging to be scolded by the class representative. Ida never even raised its head from the bowed, contemplative position. Quiet down, Aizawa-sensei called as he entered through the door. Instantly, all 21 students were in their seats, looking at Aizawa-sensei respectfully. Their straight postures and attentive gazes spoke volumes of the respect the students had for the man, and the control that Aizawa-sensei was naturally able to accomplish. Aizawa-sensei looked about the room, eyes roaming over each face and lingering on Shinsu in the very back. With a nod, he began. Today we will be discussing something essential to your work as heroes. I hope you are prepared. A shiver ran through the class at the ominous words. Ashido and Kaminari both groaned, their heads hitting their desks in defeat. I can't take any more strong information this week, Ashido whined. But it's only Monday, and knowing Aizawa-sensei, this will be on our final exam, Kaminari whimpered. Everything learned in class should be on the final exam. Aizawa-sensei glared at the two and waited for them to sit back up. You need codenames. Today you will be choosing your hero identities. Today is going to be totally awesome. The class cheered, jumping from their seats. Finally, something fun, Hagakura-san cheered. Aizawa-sensei's hair only had to start floating for a second for the class to be put back in order once more. Your hero names will likely be temporary, but take them seriously or the classroom door slammed open, interrupting Aizawa-sensei's speech. Kayame-sensei sauntered through the doorway, her voice raising in a dramatic way that was reserved for her hero persona. You'll have hell to pay later. What you pick today could be your code name for life. You better be careful, or you will be stuck with something utterly indecent. Midnight, Minetasen drooled, making grabby motions with his hands. She's got a point. Aizawa-sensei drew on. Midnight is going to have final approval over your names. This isn't my forte. The sleeping bag was already to his waist when Hagakura-san's shirt arm raised, and she made a noise to catch his attention. What? Aizawa-sensei asked, annoyance flickering in his gaze. Didn't you have to choose your name, sensei? Shouldn't you be helping too? Aizawa-sensei rolled his eyes. Mike gave me the name Eraserhead. Now if that's everything, I'll be taking a nap. Izuku grinned at the man's antics and tucked the information about sensei's name into the back of his mind. He would have to ask Yamada-sensei how he came up with a name that Aizawa-sensei agreed to. Whiteboards were passed down the rows of students, and everyone got to work. Izuku looked around the room, taking in the other students' expressions and body language. Some were prepared, a determined look in their eye as they wrote down the names that they probably had planned for years. Others looked just as stumped as he felt. Izuku had a feeling that the reasoning was probably quite different. Izuku had a hero name. He'd had one for almost 4 years by this point. The question was if he was allowed to use it. Just as he was about to raise his hand, Kayame-sensei walked by his desk, sliding a note onto its surface. Izuku stared at the paper for a while before picking it up and unfolding it. Hero name: Good afternoon, Midoriya-kun. I hope your day has gone well. As I am sure you are aware by now, you shall be choosing a hero name today. It is likely that you will opt to use Deku. However, this cannot be permitted. The police force, CPS, Hero Commission, and UA as a whole do not permit the use of known vigilante or villain names to be used as hero names. Thus, you must choose something new. Best of luck. Nezu, principal of UA High School. Izuku read and reread the note a few times before crushing it in his hands. It wasn't fair. Deku was his name. It was all that he represented as a hero. Why did things have to be so F-seeking strong at this school? Deku stared down at his blank whiteboard as anger shot through him. How the hell was he supposed to partake in this project without dishonoring the part of himself that he most respected? After 10 minutes, Kayame-sensei drew everyone's attention to the front of the room. "Alright, who shall be the first one to present?" the woman said with a flourish and snap of her WHP. "Wait, we have to share these," someone called out, hesitation lacing their words. "Oh, I shall share the magnifique title I have so stylishly created," Aomasan called, sauntering away from his desk and up to the podium. With great exaggeration, the blond boy flipped his board, revealing an entire sentence of a hero name. "I shall be called, I cannot stop twinkling." The boy said the name in English. "It means that my sparkle will forever shine," he clarified in Japanese. Deku snorted along with a few of the other members in class. It wasn't the worst he had heard, but it was certainly a mouthful. "Oh, sparkly," Kayame-sensei cheered. "Though it would be best if you took away the I and combined can not to can't," the woman said, correcting the name on the board. "Oui, mademoiselle, it is perfection," Aomasan called as he practically danced back to his desk. "Ooh, I'll go next," Ashidasan called before Kayame-sensei had a chance to ask. "I am Alien Queen," the pink girl said happily. A shudder went through Kayame-sensei at the name, though Izuku didn't know why. "You mean like that horrid monster in the movies?" the teacher asked. "I think not. Back to the drawing board. A movie reference. A villain from a movie, apparently. Pity." Izuku had actually thought the name was pretty neat. Asuasan traversed the aisle up to the podium next. "I thought this described me well," the girl said before turning her board. "The frog hero, Froppy." Kayame-sensei all but gushed over the name. "It is truly a magnificent hero title that will surely serve you well in the years to come," the woman said cheerfully. With that, the class devolved into a chant of the name Froppy. The frog girl smiled kindly at them all as she took her seat. Kirishimasen went next, taking the name of Red Riot to pay homage to his favorite hero, Crimson Riot. Jirosen went with Earphone Jack. Shajasan chose Tentacle. Sarasen opting for Cellophane. On the class presented, some being sent back to revise, and then being invited back to the front once they thought they had fixed everything. The names weren't terrible, though some were far from creative. Izuku couldn't help but think that they probably should have had a literature class on creativity before this one to help get the mental juices flowing. Then again, who was he to talk? His board was still blank. A few of the students, like Todoroki-san and Indasan, went with their first names obvious placeholders for when they truly decided to take on a title. Minae-san was sent back to his seat 4 times for choosing sequelized or off-the-wall names such as Womanizer. The final time, Kayame-sensei actually hit him with her WHP lightly. "I've had enough of you. I am all for the acceptance of your sequality, but this is going a bit too far, young man. This is your hero name. Take the task seriously." In the end, Minae-san went with G-Juice in reference to how his quirk made his hair look. When Kaken strutted up to the podium, the class was in for a surprise. "King Explosion Murder," he yelled out. That name was shot down quickly. Shinsu walked up next, nerves tensing his shoulders and a faint blush lighting on his cheeks at having to be in front of so many people. On his board lay 2 English words followed by katakana. Vox in Annie's. It's Latin. Vox means voice because my quirk, and in Annie's, it means empty, hollow, and foolish, in reference to those who fall under my control," he said, his flush growing at the confused looks of everyone in the room. "My dad liked the language." Shinsu looked everywhere, but at the class while he waited for the name to be accepted or denied. "I think it is perfect," Kayame-sensei said excitedly. "What a marvelous reason to use another language as well." Shinsu nodded and hurriedly went back to his seat at the teacher's acceptance. Next was Uraraka-san, who went with the name Uravity. It was clever and cute, and thus was immediately accepted by Kayame-sensei. Kaken went back to the podium once more, his board now reading Lord Explosion Murder. It was also shut down, much to the explosive blonde's annoyance. After a few more restates, everyone had their names accepted, Kaken ultimately going with Katsuki. "Midoriya," Kayame-sensei asked. "You're the only one left." Deku looked back down at his board. If he wasn't allowed to use the name Deku, then he would just use his real name, which just so happened to also be Deku, if read correctly. People could think of it what they will. Deku walked up to the podium and turned his board around. The kanji was written in big, bold stripes. What? You're going with your real name too? So uncool, Ashida-san shouted from her seat. What's with you boys? Depends how you read it. Kaken snorted from his seat. Multiple sets of eyes turned in his direction. What do you mean, Bakubro? Kirishima-san asked. Kaken sneered before holding eye contact with Deku. Technically, he said slowly, the first character can be read with its sound. D, Jiruzen asked. Deku. Isn't that like an insult? Kaminari-san said. Don't be so mean, Bakubro. Yeah, no reason to tease him, Uraraka-san said, standing from her seat. Kaken never stopped glaring into Deku's eyes, a look of contentment on his features. Kayame-sensei had gone a little pale. All right, that's enough. If you wish to go with your first name for now, that is fine. Try and think of a new option in the future, okay? Deku shrugged as he started walking back to his seat. For the first time, he looked towards the back of the class to find Shinsu gaping at him, eyes wide and mouth open. Ah, FCK. Maybe this wasn't such a good power move. To Izuku's surprise, there was little to no mention of the hero names after class on Monday. Shinsu gave curious looks to Izuku now and then but kept quiet, never even mentioning what had him looking so surprised. A small thread of hope traveled through Izuku that Shinsu might have been shocked over something else. Perhaps he had been in his own thoughts and his face simply reflected whatever he had been thinking about. The more cynical part of Izuku knew that this probably wasn't the case. Shinsu knew something. Whether it was the full extent of what the name Deku meant, or if it was a realization that Kaken might have been a worse bully in the past than Izuku had let on, Izuku didn't know. Luckily, the boys don't ask policy still seemed to remain in place. Most of the conversation between the two boys had to deal with the internships, specifically Shinsu's internship. He hadn't chosen where to go yet, and the paper was due at the end of the day. The entire lunch PRD was spent reviewing the indigo-haired boys' options. Shinsu didn't completely make up his mind until after school training, however. This was due 4 to 5 minutes ago. Kid. Aizawa-sensei drawled as he took the paper. Shinsu toed the ground in guilt, hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. I couldn't decide, he said. I'm sorry. Aizawa-sensei shook his head, but put the paper into his bag anyway. I'll let you know if any of these places still have a spot open for you. Shinsu grinned and nodded before his face fell again. So, that permission form. Aizawa-sensei looked up at the boy sharply. It's due on Friday. That one can't be late. Shinsu nodded. Does it have to be my current guardian's signature? Aizawa-sensei sighed, rubbing a hand down his face before putting his full focus on the brainwasher. Explain. Shinsu's face reddened as he shifted slightly under Aizawa's piercing gaze. It's just, he started, looking anywhere but at the questioner. My mom is willing to sign it. But she's in prison, so she's not actually my immediate guardian. You want a convicted criminal to sign your permission slip to do hero work? She isn't a criminal, Shinsu said, eyes meeting Aizawa's for a split second before looking back down. She just made a few bad choices. She never hurt anyone, Aizawa sighed. He really needed to make a lesson on what was legally considered a criminal. If no other student got anything out of it, Shinsu and Izuku would both benefit. She's still my mom, Shinsu whispered. She's a good mom. She's in there because she was trying to protect me. Why won't you just get your fosters to sign? Aizawa asked. Shinsu's body stilled as a hand drifted up to caress his jawline. They don't like the idea of me entering the hero course, he whispered. Aizawa's brows knit together as he stared even stronger at the boy before him. Why not? Shinsu flinched ever so slightly. They don't like when I use my quirk. They think I might try to use it on them if I strengthen it. Aizawa internally groaned at the implication of those words. I can set up a meeting with your fosters to explain the program. Being in the hero course would help your control more than hinder it. If they are afraid you'll use your quirk, they should be ecstatic that you are transferring. Shinsu shook his head. I already explained that. I only have to be with them for 8 more months. Please don't make things worse. A meeting isn't necessary. Aizawa huffed and glared at the boy. Make things worse? Shinsu shook his head again and took a step back. Can my mom sign the permission slip or not? He asked. Aizawa sighed once more, hand finding the bridge of his nose and massaging slightly. No, she isn't your legal guardian. If it's an issue, allow me to speak. No, Shinsu interrupted, face turning a dark shade of red when he realized what he had done. No, I'll figure it out. Don't get involved. It'll be fine. He corrected quickly. Both teacher and student fell silent as they faced off. Tea training? Izuku asked, breaking the tension after a few minutes of Aizawa assessing the boy. It's due Friday. Aizawa finally spoke, turning away. Training commenced like normal, despite the tense conversation that had been had. Halfway through, Aizawa-sensei called for a water break. Deku fell away while the two boys cooled down from sparring. The second half of training would be quirk exploration today, so they didn't need to stay warmed up. After both had finished their share of water, Shinsu looked over at Izuku, face flushing slightly. Think you would be allowed to go out after school on Friday? He asked, voice much lower than normal. It? Yeah, Shinsu said. Like, to hang out outside of school. Oh. Izuku said. I have to ask. So it's not completely off the table? I don't think so. Izuku said slowly. I just have to ask. Izuku said, grabbing for his water bottle once more to keep his nervous hands busy. Maybe don't PSS off sensei. He'll let you go. Shinsu said, looking away. Izuku choked on the water, coughing strong enough that it was becoming difficult to breathe. What do you think sensei has to DDDO with it? Izuku asked. Not lying. He wasn't lying. He was asking Shinsu a question. The other boy looked at Izuku for a while before shrugging. Just ask your foster parent. Izuku's eyes wandered over to where Aizawa-sensei was lying in his sleeping bag, feigning sleep. After a second of thought, Izuku nodded slowly before jolting back up. IP probably need details, like when, where, how late. Oh, Shinsu said, the blush reforming on his face. Well, there is a place I like to go on special occasions. It's a cat cafe, just one train stop away. Special occasion? Izuku asked, confused. Shinsu stopped, face flushing more. It's stupid. I'm turning 16 on Friday. I figured, since I have a friend, it's your birthday, Izuku asked excitedly, bouncing up and onto his knees. My birthday's in 2 weeks. I've never actually celebrated someone else's birthday before. I don't really know what you're supposed to do, but going to a cat cafe sounds nice. I really hope I get to go. Oh man, I was really hoping I was older than you. Why do you get all the cool stuff? You're older, taller, have a neat quirk. Not fair. Genetic lottery really hates me, doesn't it? Hey, am I supposed to get you something? Or Shinsu held up a hand, cutting off the rambling. I didn't think you would get so excited. It was Izuku's turn to flush this time. Sorry, I just haven't ever had a friend to celebrate with. Shinsu grinned. Good, then neither of us can mess up too bad. Izuku nodded passionately. So, do I need to get you something? It would probably be homemade, if that's okay. I don't really have money or anything. Don't worry about it, Shinsu said. If you can go, that will be enough. The rest of training was difficult to focus on as Izuku itched to ask Aizawa-sensei if he could go. The man had not even given a hint through his facial features, and Izuku felt like he would go insane if he had to wait any longer. So, when training finally ended, Izuku practically forced Shinsu out of the UA gates, and then sprinted back to find the dark-haired teacher. Aizawa-sensei was in the sitting room when Izuku entered the dorms. To Izuku's disappointment, Aizawa-sensei was on the phone, talking to one of the hero agencies that Shinsu had put as his second choice. Izuku sat impatiently in front of Aizawa-sensei while he waited for the conversation to end. Yes, I will inform you as soon as I receive his permission slip, Aizawa-sensei said, writing something down on Shinsu's form. You agree not to back out? Yes. A pause. Yes. Thank you for working with UA in creating the best heroes possible. I will speak with you again on Friday. With that, Aizawa-sensei hung up. Shinsu's G going to his second CH choice? Izuku asked, craning his neck to look at the form. Yes, so long as the permission slip is signed. I'm glad his second choice was available. Wisecrack's agency has a good mix of mental-based quirks. They excel at using weapons, too. They'll really be able to help him focus in on possible tactics when combating an enemy, and Izuku cut himself off. Aizawa-sensei probably already knew all this stuff. It was what I suggested be his first pick, Izuku said. It's nice to think he took my advice to some extent. Aizawa-sensei grunted and nodded. Izuku stared at him for a while before taking a breath. Can I go? Izuku asked, drawing the gaze of a few teachers who were also in the lounge. To the cat cafe with Shinsu, Izuku clarified, just in case Aizawa-sensei chose to be obtuse in that moment. I need to speak with Nezu and Yamada about it, Aizawa-sensei said. Izuku deflated a little. Oh. The boy backed away from the man a little, frustration and sadness hitting his body in waves. When fosters in the past said they needed to speak with someone else on a matter, it usually meant the answer was no. As Izuku backed up and turned to go to his room, Aizawa-sensei grasped onto his arm. Izuku jolted a little, but made no other reaction to the action. That isn't a no. I don't see a reason why you can't go, but I need to make sure it is okay with everyone else as well. We need to figure out who will watch you while you are out and about. I'm supposed to patrol, but might be able to push my shift a little later. If not, I need to ask some of the other teachers. I assume you don't want someone who will be noticeable, right? Izuku nodded his head slowly, eyes widening in surprise. You aren't a prisoner here, Izuku, Aizawa-sensei said firmly. But things need to be situated before I can give you a firm yes. Do you understand? Izuku nodded again. You should make sure you have all of your chores done that morning. I expect homework to be completed by noon on Saturday. I'll talk with Zashi about giving you some spending money. Izuku felt a little weak at the information. You don't have TTTO give me anything. I have a little C cash from Mirio-senpai trying TTTO give me tea treats, Izuku said. If I CC can go, that will be enough. I know, kid. But I'll talk about it with Zashi anyway, Aizawa-sensei said softly. Izuku nodded once more, head spinning just a little. Tears pricked behind his eyes, and he fought to keep them at bay. Thanks, he said, before spinning on his heel and bolting up the stairs before the tears made themselves known. Softy, Kayama murmured when the kid left the room. You made him cry with happiness, she said with a small chuckle. Aizawa sighed, shooting a glare at the woman. Midori is going out? Ectoplasm asked, surprise evident in his tone. Shinsu asked him to a cat cafe in celebration of his birthday. Aizawa explained. It's kind of last minute, Ectoplasm said with a frown. All plans made by teenagers are last minute, Kayama said with a small laugh. Right before the internships, though. They are hero course students. There will never be a great time to do anything, Aizawa commented. You should have heard him when Shinsu brought it up. He mused. Oh, was he a stuttering mess? Or was Deku in charge? It was the Izuku persona. But he didn't stutter, Aizawa said, a hint of fondness filtering through his tone. It was similar to when he first met everyone, like a puppy, Aizawa drawled. Then, his brows furrowed as he thought back to the conversation. He said he's never celebrated a birthday with someone before. I'd bet he hasn't celebrated his own in a while, either. The last home certainly wouldn't have cared. Then he definitely has to go. If Nezu says no, I'll just knock him out for a few hours, Kayama said firmly. Aizawa rolled his eyes. Sure you would. When is Midoriya-kun's birthday? Majima asked, looking up from his grading. 2 weeks. July 15th, Aizawa said. So soon? I could have missed it, Kayama cried. We have to go all out. We can throw him a party, make a cake, decorate the house, get him a new outfit for every year he hasn't celebrated. No, Aizawa said, cutting the woman off. Overwhelming him would be counterproductive. We can celebrate, but we should keep it small. Kayama grinned at Aizawa again. Like I said, softy. Nezu agreed to let Izuku go on his outing very publicly on Wednesday night. Aizawa-sensei had gone over his stipulations once more before handing over some cash for Izuku to put away. Yamada-sensei had beamed at him as Izuku shoved the money into his pocket. Mind once more a swirling mass of happiness that he couldn't even hope to sort through. It wasn't until a little while later that it truly sunk in that he would get to leave UA for a few hours for a reason that was not a doctor's appointment. Aizawa-sensei and Yamada-sensei weren't expecting the hug they received from Izuku as the tears finally let loose. Thank you. Izuku mumbled over and over as he held the two men. Aizawa-sensei ran a hand through his hair until Izuku let go. He knew he looked a fool for crying, but at that moment, the boy didn't really care. Do you know what you're going to wear, little listener? Yamada-sensei asked. My school uniform, right? We are going right after school. Yamada-sensei looked horrified at the thought. Maybe put a change of clothes in your bag, just in case. Aizawa-sensei suggested. Izuku nodded before being dragged up the stairs by his very excited blonde guardian. After 30 minutes of looking through his wardrobe, Yamada-sensei reluctantly agreed to let Izuku wear a basic t-shirt and some shorts. I'm not going to dress up all fancy just to go to a cat cafe, sensei, Deku had argued. But it's your first outing. At least wear a nice colored shirt. Yamada-sensei pleaded. Deku pulled out his t-shirt with the phrase dress shirt on it. Yamada-sensei blanched at the idea. In the end, Yamada-sensei allowed Izuku to choose a white tee with a cat keyboard emoticon written across the ch saying, =circumflex. Circumflex Friday came very quickly after that. Shinsu had, in fact, planned to change out of his school uniform after school, so Izuku changed directly into his t-shirt and shorts after class let out. Ida once more did not scold Izuku, despite the small level of disrespect he was showing by not being in uniform on school grounds. Shinsu, also out of uniform, met Izuku by the teacher's lounge, where the purple-haired boy dropped off his signed permission slip. Izuku wanted to know how he had managed to get the signature, but didn't ask. That was Shinsu's business. The taller boy wore a gray shirt with a picture of a black cat sitting in a teacup. Underneath the picture was the English words Kittia. Over top of the shirt, he wore an open, muted green button-down with black accents. The bottoms of his black relaxed jeans were rolled up a few times, showing off a few inches of his shin. I like your shirt, Izuku said with a small smile when they met up. Shinsu looked over Izuku for a second before humming. I like yours, too. With that, the two set off, out of view. Izuku hesitated a little at the gates, but at Shinsu's concerned look, he pressed on. With every passing moment, Izuku feared the cuffs around his wrists would activate. He knew, logically, that he had permission to be out. He knew that Aizawa-sensei was tracking his every movement from a safe distance. He knew that there was practically a 0% chance of him being restrained. But the PND in his ch-sen didn't let up. He and Shinsu didn't talk much on the way. The train ride was mostly spent staring out the window. At one point, Shinsu shared an earphone with Izuku, and they listened to music until the train reached the stop. Izuku was jittery. His hands shook and his legs bounced with his nerves. He continuously rubbed the cuffs around his wrists and had to bite back a small yelp when the metal pole inside the train shocked him. He had thought for sure that was the cuffs activating. When they exited the station, Shinsu pulled him to the side, grabbing at one of Izuku's wrists and inspecting it. You got permission, didn't you? Shinsu asked. Izuku looked at the other in confusion. What do you mean? To come. You got permission to come with me? Izuku nodded, confusion still playing across his face. Then these won't activate, right? Izuku flinched. I don't. I know they are HNDCFFS. Shinsu murmured. So I'm asking, they won't activate, right? Izuku's eyes were wide as he stared at the other boy. No, they shouldn't. Shinsu nodded. But you are still nervous that they will? Izuku nodded faintly, eyes darting to the side. I'm sorry, it's your birthday, and it's your first time outside in a while. It's fine. Who's tracking us? Tracking, Izuku. There really isn't a point in feigning ignorance. Shinsu said. Aizawa-sensei. Shinsu nodded. Then if anything happens, you'll be okay. Izuku nodded again. All right. Then don't worry so much. I'm right here. Aizawa-sensei is close by. Even if something does happen with these, you'll be okay. Shinsu said, raising Izuku's wrist to show the cuffs. Enjoy your taste of freedom. Izuku nodded once more, and stumbled slightly when Shinsu pulled him along, keeping a steadying hand over the band that wrapped around Izuku's wrist. I haven't been to the cafe in a while, Shinsu said, looking at Izuku with a small smile. I hope they still have Yuki. Yuki? She's this elderly pure white cat. She's got big blue eyes that look like ice and her tail is super fluffy. She has some kind of genetic thing that made her deaf. But she is the sassiest ahole in the whole store. She only lets you pet her if you feed her some of the most expensive treats in the store. She's my favorite. Deku grinned. Why? She sounds difficult. I'm attracted to difficult things, Shinsu said, another grin falling on his face. Makes me feel like maybe I'm not so terrible. You make yourself suffer to feel good about yourself. Midnight Sensei did call me a masochistic at the sports festival, Shinsu said with a low chuckle. Deku beamed at Shinsu. She's pretty good at knowing her students at a glance, then. Deku agreed. She called you an MSCST, too. Obviously, she's never seen me kick your butt when we spar. If that doesn't scream SDST, I don't know what would. Ah, so you are aware of how much of an a-hole you are when we spar. I wasn't sure if you realized how much joy you seem to take from kicking me down. And yet you still come back twice a week. Both boys grinned at one another as they walked through the doors of the cafe. The walls were painted a bright yellow, with black silhouettes of cats playing scattered among the expanse. Shelves traversed the vertical space, allowing the cats full reign of the room. Toys were stored in a large toy sectional, though many of them were on the floor. Beds, boxes, and pillows were situated in multiple areas, some with sleeping felines already curled inside. Deku looked around in awe of the place as a petite girl with cat ears and whiskers trotted up to them. Welcome to our store, she said happily, her voice soft and smooth. I am Nea. It is a pleasure to serve you. Izuku and Shinsu both nodded at the girl as she rattled off the coffee and tea specials for the day while leading them to a vacant booth. Only one other group was in the store. A mother and father and little girl, all of whom were playing happily with a small kitten off to the side. Thus, it didn't really matter where Izuku and Shinsu sat, the employee only showing them a table out of formality. Please let me know when you're ready to order, Nyasan said kindly with a small bow. Shinsu thanked her before turning to Izuku. You want food now? Deku shook his head, looking around the room, trying to spot white fur. I want to find Yuki. It didn't take long to find the elderly cat. The prissy feline was languished across one of the tables, eyes tracking the smaller kittens on the floor lazily. She sniffed Shinsu's hand willingly when he walked up to her, nipping his fingers gently. Izuku did not receive such a warm welcome. The white cat grunted when he came up, stood from her spot, and trotted away with the flick of her tail. I told you she only likes you if you feed her, Shinsu said with a smirk. Deku huffed and walked over to the table, pressing the bell that called the server. Nyasan appeared almost instantly, her soft smile placed securely on her face. How may I help you? She asked. Can I get 2 of whatever treats the cat Yuki likes? The girl nodded. Those would be our true salmon kitty fish cakes. They run in at 500 yen per treat. Deku nodded. That's fine. Thank you. Nyasan bowed and left through the door leading to the back room. Sheesh. You really want Yuki to like you, huh? I only ever get her 1. Yen 500 is a little ridiculous for 2 bites of treat. I got 1 for you to give her, Deku said. Shinsu spluttered for a moment before holding up his hands. You didn't have to do that. I could pay for my own treats. I know. But it's your birthday, and I didn't really get you much. Oh, speaking of. Deku swung his backpack off his shoulders and dug through it for a little bit. I made this. I don't know how well they work, but 2 small tabs were placed on the table, each one about the size of a credit card. They were completely black and only a few centimeters thick. What are they? Here, put it in your palm, Izuku said excitedly. He fiddled with the trinket a little, placing each of Shinsu's fingers on the pad, as if fingerprinting him. Once the process was complete, the screen lit up with a purple hue. All right, press at least 3 fingers to the surface, Izuku instructed. Shinsu did, and the screen lit up once more. Izuku followed suit, and then began tapping on his device. With each tap, Shinsu's card vibrated and lit up a faint green. Shinsu tapped his own, the color glowing purple on both his device and Izuku's. Izuku's also vibrated. We can use them to communicate, Izuku said happily. They are programmed to take our fingerprints and make the other person's communicator vibrate and glow whenever the fingerprint is registered. I've been working on them for a while, but did a rush job on these. The final product is supposed to be able to translate Morse code into on-screen text as well as contact more than just one other device. But I thought this would be fine for now. Shinsu was looking at Izuku as if he had solved the strongest math equation in existence. How do you come up with this stuff? Well, I saw the idea on an online forum, actually. Someone named Luwriting Mime? Is that French? You don't think it could have been Aoyama, do you? Deku snorted at the idea. Doubtful. Aoyama isn't stupid, but he isn't really tech-savvy either. Besides, it was online. It could have been anyone. It was a really clever idea though, don't you think? Yeah, it is, Shinsu said, looking down at the object and tapping it a few times, watching the thing light up in the faint purple hue. The one in Izuku's hand vibrated in time with Shinsu's taps. Do you know Morse code? Izuku asked nervously. That would be the easiest way to communicate with these. Shinsu grinned and nodded. I've been practicing a few things, actually, Shinsu said. I'm learning sign language. The motions were a little choppy, but the signs were clear. That's awesome, Izuku said happily. Sign language is so helpful with hero work. You never know when you will need to sneakily speak with someone. I'm so glad you are learning. It'll be easier for me to talk to you, too, Shinsu said softly, when you can't speak. Izuku's grand smile softened as he nodded his head. At that moment, the waitress came out, holding a small plate with two tiny cookie-looking objects on them. Yuki ate Shinsu's treat as soon as it was presented, but stuck her nose up at Deku's offering. It took more than 15 minutes for the cat to finally take a single nibble of the treat before gobbling the whole thing. After that, the cat seemed much more content with the green-haired boy. Deku still wasn't permitted to pet her for more than a few seconds, but that was enough for Izuku to feel content with the interaction. On the other hand, Yuki had apparently decided that Shinsu was the best human, as she curled up in his lap on the floor and dozed off to sleep. Deku rolled his eyes at the sight before entertaining himself with some of the kittens rolling about. The family in the corner got up after a bit, requesting for adoption papers. Deku flinched a little at the words, but then his eyes went wide. You can adopt these cats? He asked. Shinsu nodded, stroking Yuki's head lightly as the feline slumbered. Yeah, that's why I'm never sure if Yuki will still be around. Deku hummed and looked around. When your mom gets released, why don't you ask her to adopt Yuki? Shinsu shifted uncomfortably where he sat. When mom gets released, she'll just end up back in prison within the year. There would be no point. I'd have to give Yuki away. Why take her away from somewhere she feels comfortable only to put her in an unstable situation? Why would your mom end up back in prison? Shinsu sighed. Because that's what always happens. After the first 2 months, money gets tight. We move back to that shithole, and the gang finds out she's free again. It never takes much convincing to get her to be their scapegoat again. As soon as we can't afford food, as soon as I start missing meals, she caves. Every goddamn time. Izuku looked down at his lap, waving a feather in front of the Bengal kitten's face. Sorry. Didn't mean to bring up a depressing topic. It's fine. It's my life, after all, Shinsu said with a sigh. The two fell silent for a while longer before Shinsu perked up. I'm hungry. Want something? Deku shrugged. You like green tea, don't you? It's fine, Izuku said lightly. Be better than most things. Shinsu grinned and stood, disturbing Yuki, who walked up with a frustrated huff. You're gonna love this. They make homemade matcha ice cream here. It's a huge bowl too, so we can share. Payback for the cat treats, okay? Izuku hummed before nodding. The ice cream was, in fact, pretty good. Shinsu and Izuku managed to finish the entire bowl, though neither would have dreamed of finishing it alone. Some of the more scavenger-like cats had decided to lick up the melted cream at the bottom of the bowl before being shooed off by the employee. The boys stayed for a while longer, enjoying the company of the cats before finally deciding to leave. They'd spent 2 hours at the cafe, and now set out to walk around a little before they grabbed fast food for dinner. Izuku did a double take as the two headed towards a park. This park, in particular, was very familiar. Do you come to this park a lot? Deku asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Not really. I only really spend time at the cafe when I'm in this part of town. Deku hummed low in his throat as he looked around the area. Is something wrong? Shinsu asked, tilting his head to the side, a common occurrence when Shinsu was comfortable. No, it's just, I know this park. I used to play here when I was little. It's strange to think about you when you were little. Deku gave a short chuckle at the words and shook his head. I could say the same for you, he said. Come over here. There's this old clubhouse just past a bridge. Izuku took Shinsu's hand and led the way. The bridge had been refurbished, the wood no longer rotting away. It was much nicer to walk across, and the two boys stopped to look down at the fish swimming in the small stream below. Kakin fell in there once. Deku said with a small smile. I tried to help, but he just pushed me down when I reached him. Oh, another time in which Bakugo was in a hole. I wish I could say I was surprised. He wasn't too bad. Now that I think about it, that was around the time he actually started to pick on me. Bully you, Izuku. Deku shrugged, brushing of the harsher statement. Come on, the clubhouse. A short trek through some shrubbery showed a much more run-down shack. The door, if you could call the rotting piece of wood that was hanging on by a single hinge. Moth-eaten sheets covered the holes where windows were probably supposed to be. Graffiti littered every inch of the pitiful structure. Appealing. Shinsu deadpanned. Deku flushed a little before glaring at the other boy. It was better when I was little, I swear. Shinsu raised a brow and shook his head before moving towards the thing. Think the door will come off if I touch it? Probably, with the state it's in, Deku said, moving forward as well. When was the last time you were here? A few years ago. I spent the night for a few days. Shinsu nodded, ducking in through the door with Deku following behind. The inside was pretty much empty. A few old beer cans littered the floor and graffiti covered every wall. But other than that, the place was barren. I think the bridge was nicer, Shinsu said after a second. I have to agree, Izuku said, looking around. With that, the two exited the shack and headed back, sitting down on the bridge for a while before they were hungry enough to grab dinner. Deku could have swore he saw a flash of black up in the trees, but looked away just as quickly, not wanting to go searching for Aizawa-sensei. No need to put emphasis on the fact that he was being followed. Deku shifted a little uncomfortably as his mind wandered back to earlier in the day. Shinsu's reaction on Monday came to mind, as well as the fact that the other boy seemed to know way more than he should. What do you know? Deku whispered after a second. Hopefully too much to tell you in a single afternoon, Shinsu joked. About me? Izuku clarified. Just so I'm aware. Shinsu became much more serious, leaning forward so his arms rested on his knees. I only figured things out on Monday. What things? Most of it is speculation. Tell me. Shinsu sighed, looking off to the side. So much for our not ask rule. I'm not asking about your life, Shinsu. I'm asking what you know about mine. The boy sighed again before humming. A few years ago, I was in a real city home. I guess I was around 12 or so. They used to hit us for no reason other than that we were useful outlets. Deku raised a brow at the other boy. Hadn't he just said he didn't need any personal information about Shinsu? Yet the boy was still telling him. Mom told me to fight back if they hit me. I can't do anything about the legal abuse, but getting slapped around isn't legal. She said to go to the police if it got bad enough. So one day, I did. Or at least, I attempted to. Shinsu ran a hand through his hair, smoothing it back as a way to stall. I was walking to a police station when I walked right into a gang fight. I hid behind some dumpsters so I wouldn't get hit by a misfired quirk. Sector 9 is known for its gang fights. I should have known better. Izuku sicked in a slight breath, hands twitching on the wooden floor of the bridge. A kid jumped down in between the two sides, disarming a number of the fighters and knocking a few out before talking down the gangs. He got them all to go home for the night. Based on his voice, I guessed he was my age. A few of the members called him Deku. Shinsu smiled a little before looking over at Izuku. I knew the name. Just figured he would be older than me. Izuku shrugged his shoulders, keeping his mouth firmly shut. Eraserhead appeared not long after and scolded the kid for a solid 15 minutes about how irresponsible he was being. Sounds like sensei, Izuku said with a small, awkward laugh. Then, Eraserhead gave him food, of which Deku gave away almost immediately. Even though he was clearly starving, he gave it away. All I could think was that he was an idiot. I was moved pretty quickly thereafter. That's not really proof of anything. In fact, it sounds kind of like a fever dream, Deku murmured. Shinsu snorted. I told you it was speculation, though your actions kind of give you away. Deku grunted but waited for Shinsu to continue. I tracked Deku through an online forum. He was already pretty popular by the time I saw him. Rumor was that he could be taken down with fire. No one dared touch his shoulders lest they be thrown against a wall. He was said to have mumbling tirades whenever he encountered something he found interesting, and would be a complete butt when fighting. He liked to taunt his enemy to find out information, but never used his knowledge to harm. In fact, he never really harmed anyone unless absolutely necessary. A little less than a year ago, he went missing. A single message appeared on the forums: Deku's been detained. Izuku hummed thoughtfully. At Christmas, another message appeared: Deku's safe. Shinsu turned fully towards Izuku. Then, I met you. A kid, my age, who hates fire, reacts badly when his shoulders are touched, mumbles about quirks and other topics he finds interesting. It really didn't click, though. Then we started sparring, and you were so different when you fought. You taunted me like it was a game. You pinpointed my weaknesses and used them against me without causing me any harm, even though you could have. You never left UA grounds. There was always some excuse as to why you couldn't walk to the train station with me. It was odd. I thought that there might be a possibility, but it was a crazy theory. Izuku was captivated by Shinsu's intense gaze, drawn in by his thought process. Then you brought me into the teacher's lounge to eat lunch, and that was by far the strangest thing to ever happen to me. Deku couldn't stop the bark of laughter that escaped from him. Sorry about that, he said softly. Didn't think it was all that strange, honest. Shinsu shrugged. The teachers all knew you really personally. You could tell by their stares. I made a few comments that made the teachers freeze up. It was obvious something more was happening. It was obvious they knew you more closely than as teacher-student. Especially Aizawa-sensei. Same with the sports festival and after. Everyone was looking out for you like you were their kid. Shinsu rolled his shoulders and looked towards the sky. Then Bakugo related your name to the name Deku. And I thought, with your self-deprecating behavior, of course you would use a name that a bully picked out for you. Bakugo said it like he had said it 100 times before. You grinned like the name was something familiar and warm. It's my name. Deku said simply. It is familiar. It's a part of who I am. After that, it wasn't terribly strong to piece things together. You were caught by Eraserhead of something, and somehow, Yua got custody of you, putting you in the hero course in an attempt to encourage you to be a hero legally. You hate the bracelets because they are part of what's keeping you under control. The police hated Deku. They would want a failsafe. In other words, mobile HNDCFFS with built-in tracking devices, probably. That certainly made more sense than quirk suppressors, considering you're quirkless. Quirk suppressors? Not uncommon to find in care. Most of the kids in my group home have some version of them. They use the same fabric. When a kid gets out of control, the parent can inject the quirk suppressant dosage or activate the material to form whatever version of quirk adapter is needed. That's how I knew how to undo them. I take mine off all the time. Izuku paled at the possible implication of Shinsu's words. And you didn't deny my claim this afternoon, nor just now. You don't lie, so all I've said is probably the truth. You aren't far off, Deku said slowly. Just a few details, but you got the idea. Shinsu grinned. I feel like a detective. Nah, you're better at putting pieces together than any detective I know. Deku said with a laugh, before growing serious again. You can't tell. I know. Yua will be dragged through the mud if people realize a vigilante was accepted into the program. Probably, Shinsu agreed. I might get removed for my safety. Deku spat. Shinsu frowned. I won't tell. Thanks. Deku looked around again, wondering if Aizawa-sensei heard the conversation. You probably would have figured out a good portion if you chose to train with Aizawa-sensei. Anyway. That's true. You live at the rumored dorms, don't you? Yeah. I've got a cat. I found her in a dumpster. She's the reason I ended up in UA in the first place. Shinsu perked up at his words, eyes craving more information. I'll tell you about it on our way to grab food. Deku said as he stood. We should eat before sensei gets mad about me not taking care of myself. Shinsu snorted a little and followed. I can't believe I didn't piece together that Aizawa sensei was Sawyer foster parent until everything was thrown in my face. Technically, Nezu is my foster parent, Deku said. Aizawa sensei is my caretaker. You sound like a rich prat when you say it like that. Deku laughed. I kinda am rich now. From eating out of trash cans to being served food on golden plates. The dishes are strongly golden. Deku bantered back. At most, we have glass or porcelain. I get plastic and paper. A year ago I was served with my hands. Touché. At the end of dinner, the boys finally decided to end the outing. Shinsu rode the train back to Yua with Izuku, walking all the way to the gates before stopping. Izuku hesitated too, looking at the other boy. Are you going back to your house, or are you going to walk around a while? Shinsu jolted at the question. You are only allowed to stay after school twice a week, Deku said. This makes day 3. You said they haven't wanted you around much. Will the door be locked when you get home? One of the little kids will let me in through the window, Shinsu said awkwardly. But you'll be in trouble. Shinsu hesitated for a moment before nodding his head. And you were worried that I didn't have permission. The green-eyed boy snorted. Let me at least grab you some blankets just in case you can't get in tonight. Shinsu smiled lightly and shifted on his feet. I'll stay here and wait. Izuku was going to protest before he shrugged, running into the gates and towards the dorms. When he entered, a majority of the teachers were waiting for him. How'd it go, little listener? Yamada-sensei asked. Did you have fun? Did Shinsu like the communicators? Powerloader-sensei asked. You ate, right? Lunch Rush questioned, holding up a small plate of food towards the boy. Were the cats cute? Kayame-sensei asked. Did you spend your money responsibly? Ectoplasm asked. Izuku took them all in for a moment before grinning. It was great. I'll tell you all in a bit. I have to grab something first, though. Izuku nabbed his sleeping bag and slung it over his shoulder before racing back down the stairs and out the door. When he arrived back at the gates, sleeping bag in hand, Shinsu was already gone. Deku frowned, looking towards the hill where Shinsu had likely walked not a few minutes before. Liar. He whispered into the air, before turning away with a small shake of his head. Sunday arrived much more quickly than Izuku had thought it would. Aizawa-sensei woke Izuku up at 0400 to get ready for the day. The class plus Shinsu was to be sent off to their respective internships, and Aizawa was supposed to make sure that everyone got on the right train. Isn't that a little much? Izuku yawned as he dressed. They are teenagers. They've been riding trains for years. HMPH. Aizawa-sensei replied, dragging his feet as he exited the room. The poor man had yet to down his gallon of coffee, and thus would not be in the mood to answer any of Izuku's questions. He and Aizawa-sensei waited at the gates for the class. Izuku watched as the time ticked down for when the students were supposed to arrive. At 0600, Ida arrived, still as early as ever despite his less than interested attitude. A determined look was hidden behind dead eyes as he waited with Izuku for the rest of class. What agency are you going to? Izuku asked, keeping his voice low in the morning quiet. Manuel's agency in Hasu. Ida responded stiffly. Hasu? Izuku asked, straightening up. That's why Hasu? Ida shrugged off the question as more students began arriving. Yayura-zusen arrived next, followed by Shinsu, who gave a small wave to Izuku before finding a place by the wall and closing his eyes for a bit. Eventually, the entire class had arrived and Aizawa-sensei stood up from where he was sleeping in his bag. Listen up. Aizawa-sensei called, garnering everyone's attention. You all are going to be representing UA during these internships. Some are going to be a piece of cake. Some are going to be the strongest thing you've done thus far. Regardless of the difficulty level, I expect top behavior from each of you. Your agencies can and will send you back if you don't meet their standards. If I am forced to pick you up before noon on next Sunday, I will personally ensure that the remaining time you spend for the week will make you wish for death. Is that understood? The students collectively gulped, nodded their heads, and bowed as they chanted, Yes, Aizawa-sensei. As students loaded onto their respective trains at the station, Izuku waited nearby patiently. He bid farewell to Yaoyorozu-san, Uraraka-san, Kaminari-san, and a few others before running up to Iida-san and gently tapping him on the arm. Iida-san spun and sent a leveling look at Izuku, face fraught with stern lines. Are you actually going to Hasu for Manuel's agency? Iida-san's stern gaze strengthened as he looked at Izuku stronger. The hero Manuel will teach me well. I don't doubt that, Izuku said, shifting awkwardly. Look, if you have something on your mind, you should talk to someone. Izuku said, shifting once more. I'm a bit of a hypocrite to say this, but talking helps. I know we aren't really friends, but you can always talk to me. I'm sure Uraraka-san would love to speak with you too. Thank you for the offer, Midoriya-san. But I am all right. If you will excuse me, my train is boarding. With that, the glasses-clad boy walked away, leaving Izuku staring after him. Once the last student boarded, Aizawa-sensei motioned for Izuku to follow. You have a therapy appointment. Deku groaned. It will be an hour and a half. Zashi is meeting us at the facility. Is Nezu going? Deku asked glumly. No. Thank God. You are going to be in a separate room from us this time, Aizawa-sensei said tentatively. Deku tensed, hands circling around his wrists as he thought about the idea. We aren't leaving you there. You are going to have a personal therapy session for an hour. Then you are going to join me and Zashi for the last 30 minutes of ours. What's your therapy? We are learning how to handle you, brat. The right way. Deku snorted. I think you're doing fine, he grumbled. Therapy went much more smoothly than any of the three would have thought. Though Deku hesitated at the door once more, he didn't put up a fight when being separated from Aizawa-sensei and Yamada-sensei. The session mostly focused on what future sessions would be like, and then getting Izuku more comfortable in the room. Dr. Ishii had gotten out a small puzzle and helped Izuku put it together before taking out a more complex, 3D puzzle. That one took quite a while to solve, Dr. Ishii speaking encouraging words as Izuku struggled with the contraption. He just barely managed to unhook the rings from one another when the time ended. It wasn't until Izuku had entered the room with Dr. Ayuchi and the two teachers when he realized how easily Dr. Ishii had gotten him to talk about his week and possible fears for the coming week by distracting him. Izuku squirmed a little as the realization hit him, and a whole new level of respect for the doctor entered his mind. He'd need to be more careful about what he let slip next time. Despite Dr. Ishii's apparent concern for his well-being, he was still a shrink. Deku didn't need people playing with his head. The family meeting was also mostly uneventful. Dr. Ayuchi led the three of them through a few exercises meant to help each one get to know the other on a deeper level. First, start with basic stuff. Dr. Ayuchi said, I am going to ask a series of questions about someone, and the other two have to try and answer. It can be a game. Then, the doctor handed out buzzers to each person to set up the game show-like feel even more firmly. Let's start with Yamada-san. Yamada-san, I will ask a question about you, and Aizawa-san and Midoriya-kun are going to race to answer. When one gets it right, please let us know. If neither gets it right, feel free to share. All right, Yamada-sensei cheered excitedly. Dr. Aoch cleared her throat before continuing. Yamada-san's favorite color is? Izuku smacked his button quickly, but was surprised to find that Aizawa-sensei had hit his first. He says that he likes all colors equally, but he has a preference for red, specifically a vibrant red. Yamada-sensei snickered a little and nodded his head. All right, 1 point for Aizawa-san, Dr. Ayuchi said, drawing a mark on a whiteboard under Aizawa-sensei's name. The next one is about Aizawa-san. So, Yamada-san and Midoriya-kun will be battling. Yamada-sensei and Izuku both shook their heads excitedly. Aizawa-san's favorite food is? Izuku hit the button much faster this time, winning out of Yamada-sensei. He likes jelly packets. Miami mango is his favorite right now, but it used to be lovely lychee before that flavor was discontinued, Izuku said happily. Aizawa-sensei nodded his confirmation, and the next question was about Izuku. Midoriya-kun's favorite school subject is? Yamada-sensei pressed the button quickly. Though I wish it were my subject, English, Izuku prefers biological quirk studies, Yamada-sensei says proudly. Oh, you aren't a fan of English? Dr. Ayuchi asked. Izuku made a face and shook his head. It's so strong. I didn't like English either when I was in school. Though, science was certainly not a strong subject for me either. The woman said with a small laugh. Izuku grinned at her. Eventually, the questions became more in-depth. Aizawa has been to the hospital how many times? Izuku pressed his buzzer. The actual hospital, or had wounds that should have been dealt with at a hospital? The woman laughed a little. The actual hospital. 327 times. Izuku said. No, little listener. Yamada-sensei said with a smile. 332 times. Not all of his stays are public record. How do you two even know that? I don't even know that. Aizawa-sensei grumbled. Izuku's morning routine begins with what 3 steps? On and on the game continued, until ultimately, Yamada-sensei won. The man was incredibly attentive, knowing quite a bit about their preferences in daily life on top of any hero trivia of which Izuku excelled in. At the end of the meeting, Dr. Ayuchi challenged each of them to find out one thing that the other didn't know. Izuku protested to this, seeing as Aizawa-sensei and Yamada-sensei were married. But the doctor only grinned. All the more of a challenge, she exclaimed. By the time the trio arrived back at UA, it was 11:30. All right, kid, Aizawa-sensei said. Eat lunch. We start training at noon. Deku blanched. What? But internships don't start until tomorrow morning. Do you really think any of the agencies that we sent your classmates to will actually wait until tomorrow to start? Deku faltered. You have 28 minutes. Lunch rush should already have something prepared. Gym 16 when you're done. Aizawa waited impatiently for the brat. There was a lot to do and a week really wasn't enough time. So, when Deku was 17 seconds late, Aizawa set him up for the first few exercises before scolding him as the child performed one after the other. Cementos was sitting in on the training, along with Recovery Girl. Aizawa was recreating the assessment that he had made Deku complete during his first week at UA. He wanted to see the kid's progress, and comparing it to the original baseline was the best way to go about it. Based on the information gained today, Aizawa would be able to create a solid plan for the week. He was hoping to start training the kid on some Nezu-approved weapons, but was a little disappointed to see that this probably would not happen. After 5 hours of running the obstacle course, Aizawa was incredibly disgruntled by the numbers he saw. The kid had regressed. While Izuku took a water break, he went over the new stats with Cementos and Chio, all 3 of them speaking low so the kid couldn't hear. His stamina is significantly higher, but his speed, strength, flexibility, and reaction times have all plummeted. Aizawa said in annoyance. How the hell is that possible? Most of those should have been better than before now that he's healthy. He has been training with 1C. Cementos said calmly. We have been putting limiters on his speed to keep the level fair. The only time he really got to go all out was during the rare afternoon practice with 1A. And that was only if the students were using their quirks against him. Aizawa massaged his temples as he reread the stats. His form is a lot better now, at least. Chio said kindly, much less risk of injury while you train him into the ground this week. Aizawa sighed and closed his eyes. Considering the number of heroes I've turned out, this is probably the worst screw-up I've made in a while. He muttered to himself. It has not been an easy semester with Midoriya-kun, Aizawa-san. At least we know what needs to be fixed now. Wonder how the kid is gonna react to these results, Aizawa said, voice full of irritation. So much for weapons training. Deku was called over soon after and Cementos, Aizawa, and Chio all sat in a circle with the boy. The kid's face told that he knew something was wrong, though he remained quiet. Before we begin, I want to say that you are now at full health. Aizawa began. The boy sat up a little straighter at the news, though his grin was tempered by the impending, but that was about to come. Your weight is at a healthy level for your height and age. You are hitting a growth spurt now that your body is healthy enough to begin PBRTY. At this point, you should only continue to grow stronger as you practice. You are still physically behind your peers due to the late onset of maturity, but you will catch up relatively quickly. By graduation, we should see no difference. You and I can have a chat to discuss the changes you may start to experience, Chio said. The brat nodded along, listening intently to her words. Your heart is no longer struggling to keep up when you exercise and thus, Your stamina has improved greatly. So long as you continue with a set diet and don't start starving yourself again, you should be fine. The woman finished. So, why do you all look so grim? Deku asked after a slightly longer than necessary pause. Aizawa sighed. Your other stats have dropped, kid. Deku shifted uncomfortably, but remained quiet. Your speed, strength, flexibility, reaction times, and a few other things are all lower than they were originally back when you were unhealthy. Deku gaped at him. Lower? Do you mean the same? No. They are all at least 2 points lower than the first time around. Why? Deku asked, voice rising with his confusion. We have been unintentionally limiting you by having you train on the same level as 1C. Cementos said calmly. By restricting your movements instead of pushing for better, your body has lost the edge that it had been trained to have. This week, we will be working to get that edge back. Aizawa said, taking advantage of the kid's silence. From here on, you will not be restricted during training, even extracurricular training. But, I don't get it. I still practiced outside of normal training. This shouldn't have been an issue. You relearned form using a lower baseline for yourself. Cementos said. Despite training outside of school, your body grew accustomed to the main training that you did inside school. The difficulty with physically working your body is that each decision made can positively or negatively affect you in a great way. The group fell silent for a while as they allowed the kid to process the information. Aizawa was expecting anger from the child for failing him in his training, so he was surprised when the kid bowed his head. I'm sorry, the boy whispered. I should have tried stronger. I'll do better. Cementos and Aizawa both looked at each other uncomfortably, knowing full well that it was their fault that the kid hadn't excelled. There is absolutely no need to apologize, Chiyo said haughtily. These idiot teachers should have known better. You are a student, and were following their orders trusting that they were doing what was best for you. They are the ones who need to do better. Aizawa rubbed the back of his neck at the indirect scolding, but said nothing against it. The woman wasn't wrong. The kid didn't look convinced, but nodded his head anyway. All right, I want you to get a good night's sleep. We will be up 04,000 tomorrow as well, Aizawa said. This week is going to be hell, brat. Are you prepared? There isn't really another option, is there? Despite the negative words, the kid was grinning up at him, determination flashing in the emerald eyes. Aizawa could only grin back in response. Hell training. That is what the other teachers had dubbed his regiment. He had used it when he was in school, and had consequently shared it with a handful of students over the years. Each student who had experienced hell training had thrown up at least 4 times and passed out once in the course of the week. Those students were all accomplished pros as well. The struggle with hell training, of course, was the defiance that usually came about starting the second day. Students didn't believe that the seemingly ridiculous tasks were actually meant to do anything other than torture them. They often attempted to quit before the week even got started, and Aizawa would have none of that after. After the first student, he had changed the game plan. Hero course students were competitive by nature. In order to encourage the brats, he needed to give them a goal. That goal, luckily, was easy to come by. Aizawa groaned as he rolled out of bed. It had been a while since he had partaken in his old practice, and he had a feeling he would actually have to work a little stronger than normal to keep up with the brat, despite the newly discovered plummet in stats. Sho, Hisashi murmured, reaching out to keep him from leaving the warmth of the bed. I have to go train the kid, Aizawa whispered. Meet up with us before your shift if you want. Hisashi sat up on one arm, a small smile on his face as he eyed the dark-haired man. I get to see you work out today? What a nice treat. Don't be inappropriate around the brat, Aizawa warned. He gets enough of that from Nem. Oh, Nem? Someone's in a surprisingly good mood. Aizawa grinned a bit. How could I not be? I'm about to absolutely school a student who has a history of CC kindness. Hisashi laughed. Strange mix of protective parent and sadistic teacher you have going there. Aizawa shook his head as he moved to dress for the day. For once, his body was teeming with energy, excitedly awaiting the comforting burn that he would feel later that night. His mind was trained to enjoy these intense sessions, and Aizawa felt a thrill of joy at the prospect of his kid possibly outclassing him in one of the areas. How nice it would be to actually have a student be able to beat him in something. Of course, this probably wouldn't happen until the end of the week, once Deku had trained his body back into peak shape, but it was worth waiting for. For today, however, Aizawa would enjoy his time messing with the kid just a little. Izuku was already awake and getting dressed when Aizawa checked on him. A small jelly packet was thrown the kid's way before the command to meet him in the field at 0430 was given. Deku appeared at 4:28. Snipe would be watching the first activity, having just gotten off patrol and still being awake. After that, Cementos would take his place, followed by a multitude of other teachers. Today was a competition after all. An unbiased judge was needed for each activity planned. "All right, brat," Aizawa said, drawing the kid's attention. "Me and you are going to play a game today." Aizawa drawled. Deku perked up at the words, eyebrows raising in surprise. "You and I will be competing," Aizawa continued, watching every twitch of the boy's body and making sure the kid understood his words. "We will be going through some exercises that will enhance a multitude of areas. Some of them may seem ridiculous or pointless, but I assure you, they are all being done for a reason." A small tilt of the head, a twitch of fingers. The kid was interested. "If you beat me in a task, we can drop it from the weekly training," Aizawa said. "However, I don't think you will even tie with me in a single category." Green eyes flashed at the teacher. A challenge. This would be fun. The first clue that something would be different today was that Aizawa-sensei was not wearing his hero costume. Instead, he had on hot pink sweatpants with a black paw print on the pocket. The black tank top he wore showed off a multitude of scars, including the handprint scar on his elbow. He also had his hair up in a ponytail. The man looked more prepared to work out than he did on patrol. It made Izuku nervous at the thought. Aizawa-sensei chose his hero costume as it blended into the night. His hair was threatening when his quirk activated, and his lackluster appearance often made people underestimate him. Now, however, it was very clear that Aizawa-sensei was not to be using any intimidation tactics. He did not need to blend in. He did not need to be underestimated. Instead, he showed off the distinct muscles that came with years of training. He wore color that easily allowed him to be pointed out in a crowd. He tied back his hair to have better focus. Izuku was probably screwed. Deku, on the other hand, was determined to win at least one of the games. He may have regressed physically, but he could still kick an old man's butt if he put his mind to it. He had a greater amount of energy than the cranky teacher, and would use that to his advantage. "The first task will be a 10-kilometer run," Snipe-sensei explained. "It will be a race. Each lap is a quarter kilometer. Thus, you will need to complete 40 circles to finish. Even if Aizawa-san completes the laps before you, you must complete the full 10 kilometers. Understood?" Deku nodded, looking towards Aizawa-sensei for a moment. "Why are we doing it like a challenge?" "Motivation," the man replied before taking his stance. Deku followed suit, and at the sound of the whistle, both were off. Aizawa-sensei shot ahead of him instantly. Deku knew he should pace himself. He knew that this was probably a ploy to tire him out. But he pushed on, sprinting to catch up with the taller teacher. "Doesn't seem fair. Every step you take is two of mine," Deku said when he caught up. Aizawa-sensei grinned. "Fine, I'll add another 2 laps to my goal." Another 2 laps. Aizawa-sensei expected to pass Deku twice. No FC-king chance. This win was in the bag now, except that it wasn't. The sprint at the beginning was not a ploy. Aizawa-sensei never slowed to a manageable pace. He ran the entire 10 kilometers at full tilt, passing Deku 4 times before finishing his 42 laps. Deku had tried to keep pace. He had tried to continue his sprint, but by lap 28, exhaustion made itself known. By the end of his 40, he could strongly catch his breath. How the hell? Deku breathed from his spot on the ground. He had fallen to his knees when he'd finished, gulping in breaths of air, while his CHC heaved. "That is one win for me," Aizawa-sensei said. His breath was short, but nothing compared to Deku's LBR huffs. "Are you ready for the next activity?" Deku glared up at the man. Of course he wasn't ready. He couldn't FC-king breath yet. But Aizawa-sensei merely motioned for Deku to follow, disregarding the boy's struggle as he stood. Snipe-sensei bid them farewell as Samantha-sensei arrived. The angular man bowed in greeting before looking Deku over. You don't seem terribly upset. How many times did he lap you? Deku bristled at the statement before muttering. 4. Samento-sensei grinned. Much better than most other students. Deku looked up in shock at the praise. Better than other students. How many students had Aizawa-sensei done this with? What was the average? Had anyone ever beaten him? Aizawa-san has done hell training with about 10 other students before you. Samento-sensei said. The average amount of laps that he passes students in is 7. Only one student ever beat Aizawa-san in the 10-kilometer run, and she had a speed quirk. Deku gaped at the man. What was the next best? 2 laps, and then your 4 is tied with a student. The worst? 12. Aizawa-sensei said as he approached, tossing a bottle of water to Deku. The next task focuses on balance and grip. The man said as Deku downed the bottle. You and I are going to scale the edge of Ua. Deku grinned at the man. I thought I wasn't allowed to do that anymore. One-time exception to the rule. Aizawa-sensei said immediately. Don't get CCKY. We are scaling the glass portion too. Deku stilled. How? I have formed small ledges between the windows. Samento-sensei said. Some of them are brittle, others strong. You will be tasked with knowing which path to use and catching yourself should you fall. I will not allow you to plummet to your death, however, so no worries. Deku looked between the 2 teachers in awe. Whoever makes it to the top and then back to the ground safely wins. If Cementos has to save you, it's an automatic loss. Deku nodded, turning towards the main building. Extra points if you can spot some of the original niches that Aizawa-san cut into the building when he was a student. Samento-sensei said with a grin. You did this in high school? Deku asked, incredulous. How? Why? Were you suicidal or something? Samento-sensei wasn't even around until the year after you graduated. I did not have the best self-preservation instincts in my 3rd year. Aizawa-sensei said softly. Mike was perfectly capable of slowing my fall enough for me to grab onto something with my capture weapon, though. Yamada-sensei helped you. Reluctantly, Aizawa-sensei said. It was either help me or I would do it anyway. Deku pouted at the response. And you scold me for being irresponsible. Deku huffed. Shall we begin? Aizawa-sensei asked, ignoring Deku's outburst. The first few stories were simple. The building was mostly cement at this portion, and instinct kicked in as Deku climbed. He was proud to see that he was ahead of Aizawa-sensei by a bit at this point. He had always been good at scaling things. When you were short, you learned how to get to high places pretty quickly. The almost pure window section of the building started on the 5th floor. Deku hesitated as he looked up the remaining 15 stories. The windows were all lined with cement, but the grips were tiny. Samento-sensei had made purposeful ridges, but they weren't reliable. This would not be easy. Having observed long enough, Izuku started up one of the narrow paths. On the 8th floor, a classroom of 3rd-year business students looked at him in amazement, their eyes following his upward progress. The teacher, of whom Deku had never seen, slumped at the interruption. Other than Hero course, the other 3rd-year courses were all still at school this week, preparing for their major end-of-term exams. Thus, as Izuku climbed, he passed more classes of students. At one point, the bored-looking kids all went to the window to observe. One managed to form a hole in the glass, over the side of the Deku. The hell are you doing? Training. Deku grunted. Leave him alone. Go back to class. Came Aizawa-sensei's voice from above. The man was 2 stories ahead of him by now, seeming to know the building grips by heart. The words unfair advantage rang through Deku's mind. At long last, Deku made it up to the roof. Aizawa-sensei was sitting up top, stretching out his muscles and eyeing the side of the building in preparation for the trek to the ground. You are tired now. Going down may seem easier, but your muscles are strained and your grip will begin to weaken. Don't fall. He drawled while Deku rubbed at his hands. The tips of his fingers were bleeding slightly from the harsh concrete, but overall, he felt fine. He knew not to underestimate Aizawa-sensei's words, though. Deku started down at the same time as the other man. They were pretty level most of the way, until Aizawa-sensei purposefully let go of the side of the building. Deku yelped, despite the man's warning that he was about to do so. Aizawa-sensei angled himself so that his foot caught on a more sturdy ledge that Samenta-sensei had formed. It slowed his descent enough to allow him to grab back onto the wall. "Are you insane?" Deku called down to the man. "No. I knew what I was doing. You will be insane if you try to copy. However, you aren't experienced enough." Aizawa-sensei called back. "Wasn't planning on it. Erasure." Deku grumbled, now in last place one more as the two scaled down the building the remainder of the way. Aizawa-sensei was waiting for him down at the ground. Cementos was huffing very loudly off to the side, muttering about how stupid Aizawa-sensei was to scare him like that. "I almost created the slide. I thought you might have actually fallen. You've never fallen that far before grabbing on again. You are lucky I trust you. The entire exercise could have been ruined." Aizawa-sensei rolled his eyes at the man before turning to Deku. "I'm glad you didn't copy that move. That would have been suicidal." Deku grumbled. "Whether Samenta-sensei is here or not, I realize that would have been a really stupid idea. That is certainly a first." Aizawa-sensei drawled, a small smirk tugging the corner of his mouth. Deku bristled at the man. "I don't think you have any right to comment on my self-preservation, considering you used to do this with minimal support. How many times did you fall before you figured out how to catch yourself again, Sensei-kun? Don't get cheeky, brat." Aizawa-sensei snapped, mouth forming a straight line. "I am still your teacher." The following exercise seemed to be a bit more tame than the last basic sit-ups and pull-ups. At least, it was tame until you incorporated the monster of a man that Deku was now realizing held the name Aizawa Shota. We will do each of these in two different ways. The first will be how many sit-ups and pull-ups we can pull off in a set amount of time. Obviously, the one with the most wins. The second will be how long we can continuously perform the exercise without falling out of rhythm. If you fall out of rhythm, your time is stopped. Deku nodded his head. Yamada-sensei had joined the group now since this exercise would require 2 judges to keep watch. "Choose which one you want to start with, brat." Aizawa-sensei drawled. Deku looked down at his aching hands for a moment and made the choice easily. "Sit-ups? Definitely sit-ups." With a nod, he and Aizawa-sensei got in position. Samenta-sensei created convenient foot holders for them both so neither judge would have to hold down their feet as they worked on the exercise. "The first round will be timed 2 minutes," Samenta-sensei informed. "Ready? Begin." Deku set at the task immediately, staying true to the form that had been drilled into him so that no one could say he cheated. It wasn't terribly difficult to keep up the brutal pace for the 2 minutes. Aizawa-sen managed 151 in the 2 minutes. Samenta-sensei informed. 147. Yamada-sensei said. "You were so close, little listener." Deku grit his teeth. Close wasn't good enough. "Shota, are you slacking? 151 isn't very much compared to what you used to be able to do." Yamada-sensei teased. The information did not make Deku feel any better. "Shut up, Yamada. I'm out of practice. Someone wouldn't let me train for 2 months. Someone is still limiting what I'm allowed to do." Aizawa-sensei spat back. Yamada-sensei's face darkened slightly. "Be happy that I'm letting you do this at all. Don't think I didn't see the tail end of your little climb up the side of Ua, getting the one exercise that I would absolutely refuse to let you and Izuku do out of the way before I join you. Gio will kill you if you hurt your arm by pushing yourself today. I'd kill you if either of you fell." The blonde warned. Aizawa-sensei looked away from him in response, not wanting to confront the man's protectiveness and possibly end up PSS him off further. Deku, too, looked away feeling guilty despite simply following the training task. "Now, on to the next part," Yamada-sensei said happily. The pace was set with a metronome. 60 beats per minute. The first 4 minutes weren't terribly difficult to manage, but Deku had broken out in a sweat. His heart was racing, and he felt his core tremor with each movement. He dared not look to the side to see how Aizawa-sensei was faring. At 6 minutes, all Deku could do was listen to the ticking of the metronome. He had entered a meditative headspace that allowed him nothing but focus. Whilst his mind was in the right place now, his body continued to struggle. At 8 minutes and 13 seconds, Yamada-sensei tapped his leg, a call for him to stop. "You're off beat, little listener," the man said with a small smile. "You did really well, though." Deku looked to the side to see Aizawa-sensei still going, matching each beat of the metronome with ease. He was sweating, but not nearly as much as Deku. He looked at ease as he continued. The man didn't even seem to register that he didn't need to continue, probably having entered the same trance that Deku had. The boy watched him for a while, waiting to see if he would slip up, but Aizawa-sensei never made the move. How long can he go for? Deku asked softly. A little over 20 minutes is his record. Yamada-sensei replied, voice low. I'll give him to 15, since he's out of practice. Deku continued watching. Yamada-sensei's guess had been pretty accurate as Aizawa-sensei failed to reach the peak with the metronome at 15 minutes and 9 seconds. Samenta-sensei tapped him on the leg to get the man to stop. Aizawa-sensei looked lost for a split second before coming back to himself and looking over at the green-eyed boy. I lost, Deku admitted. By a lot. Aizawa-sensei nodded before standing and offering the boy a hand. Pull-ups next, he said. This one was much stronger than the previous, and both participants knew it. Another setup, courtesy of Samenta-sensei, had 2 bars held within cement blocks. The bars were at the correct height for each participant, so Deku couldn't claim that Aizawa-sensei had it easier. Both competitors simply stared at their respective bars for a moment before finally grasping on. Deku took a little more time to finally take hold of the bar he would be using. 1 minute to get as many as you can, Samenta-sensei said. Ready, go. The first 40 seconds were simple, with both Aizawa-sensei and Deku matching one another. Past that, however, it was brutal. Deku refused to stop despite the acid building up in his throat as he tried to pump out just a few more reps. At the call for time, he slowly knelt on the ground, swallowing slowly to bite back the nausea that had hit him so suddenly. 39 for the little listener, Yamada-sensei said. 4-7. Deku punched the ground in frustration at hearing the number. 4-7. How the hell was that even possible? Was he cheating? Were they making up numbers to fool Deku? There was no way there was such a major difference between the two. Kid? Aizawa-sensei asked, squatting in front of him. Deku glared up the dark-haired man, snarling slightly at the concerned look on his face. How the hell are you doing this? Half this stuff is F-seeking impossible, Deku shouted. The smirk that met his eyes made Deku livid. He moved back from the man, pulling himself up to a standing position and taking a few steps back before his anger got the better of him, and he attacked Aizawa-sensei. I'm gonna beat you in something, Deku growled. Just wait. The smirk grew and Aizawa-sensei nodded, ready for the second version of the pull-ups. Then, Deku shuddered at the thought of having to do more but nodded anyway. The metronome was set to 30 beats per minute. Deku did not last long enough to get into a headspace this time, falling out of rhythm at 2 minutes and 5 seconds. Aizawa quickly stopped after 2 more reps of staying in beat. He was not going to continue just because, that time. I hate that you can do this, Deku muttered under his breath as Aizawa-sensei passed him a water bottle. Should I still hold out hope that you will beat me in something? Aizawa-sensei asked, a much more prominent smirk on his face at Deku's words. The boy sent a withering glare at the man before turning away. What's next? Aizawa grinned at the frustrated kid. Though he was being a brat, it was a healthy level of frustrated ire he was directing at Aizawa. Determination poured off the kid in waves as he bitterly asked for the next exercise. This was exactly the attitude needed for the week to come. Breakfast. Aizawa responded in answer to the kid's question. It's 0700. You need to eat. Deku deflated at the words a little but didn't complain. When the food was set in front of him, Deku downed every bite without complaint. The kid didn't even GG as he stuffed it into his mouth. Perhaps completely wearing him out was a good motivator to make him eat. When all the food had been devoured, Aizawa set a mug of green tea before the kid, taking one for himself instead of his normal coffee. His favorite caffeinated beverage would do very little to aid him today. He needed a healthier version of liquid energy to keep up with the brat. It pained Aizawa to think of how far he had fallen in so short a time. He had reached his peak at 24. It seemed with each progressive year falling behind his top performance. Age was an undefeatable and unstoppable enemy that would someday be his downfall with these types of tests. It didn't help that he was almost an entire semester out of practice. Then again, Izuku was too. At least they were equally worse off than they had been before. Aizawa waited for a while to allow the food to settle before standing and motioning Izuku to do the same. Cementos and Yamada were quickly joined by a few other teachers who had the day off thanks to the internships. They looked at Aizawa and the kid as if waiting for an interesting film to start. To them, it probably was interesting. Aizawa rarely trained out in public, preferring his sessions to be monitored by a select few people. So when he did the more outlandish stunts, such as the hell training, it tended to draw a crowd from the heroes at the school. DMN Aizawa, already beating the kid down, Ken asked as he approached. Strongly. The kid spat. I might be losing, but I'm still keeping up. I haven't quit. Kayama grinned at the kid. Thrown up yet? Deku glared at her. No. I haven't. He said, pride showing through his anger as his Ch puffed up a bit. You will. Ectoplasm said. Deku's confident expression wavered slightly at the warning. Next, we will be doing something that was often used to train Muay Thai combatants. Since you are at a disadvantage, you must learn to use every part of your body to its utmost capabilities, including the more sensitive areas. Deku paled slightly. I really hope we aren't about to kick down some trees. Ah, so you've heard of the practice. Good. Aizawa replied, a feral grin spreading across his face. All confidence left the kid as he let his head fall into his hands. There are banana trees on the edge of the property, kid. Let's go. This is so F-seeking stupid. What insane, fanatical maniac would ever purposefully do this? Isn't it illogical to purposefully put yourself through pain? I've kicked one too many trees to think that this might even be a decent practice. Trying to kill off your nerve receptors. TCH. Doesn't F-seeking work? Still F-seeking hurts. I hate this so much. The kid muttered under his breath. Past his amusement, Aizawa was impressed that the child had already attempted the practice. As he said, it usually wasn't something that most people attempted, especially not after their first kick. The kid apparently had practiced for quite a while, however. Then again, that may partially explain his higher than average pain tolerance. Once they arrived at the trees, Aizawa addressed the boy. The goal with the trees this small is to break one with a single kick. Can you do that? The kid asked, looking up with a mixture of awe, fear, and spite. No, Aizawa said immediately. The best I've done is 2, and I doubt I'll be able to manage that today. The brat sighed at the news before looking at the trees with contempt. Whoever can break it down with the least amount of kicks wins. If you can't continue before it breaks, well, that will be all the more reason to focus on this task more throughout the week, don't you think? Deku groaned at the thought. Would you like me to go first? Deku sighed as he looked from a tree to Aizawa. Does it make a difference? No. Choose which tree you want me to use. The brat, of course, chose the thickest banana tree in the lot, a small sadistic grin spreading across his face. Aizawa kept his own impassive as he walked up to the plant. With a calming breath, Aizawa kicked, shin ramming into the bark of the tree with a sharp crack. He drew back almost instantly and kicked again. The tree bent this time. Another strike, and the wood splintered. With the 4th strike, the tree fell. Deku took up a stance next, not giving Aizawa the chance to choose for him. To his credit, the boy went with the second smallest tree in the clearing. The kid hesitated, closing his eyes for a few minutes before opening them, significantly more focused. His form was perfect as kicked at the tree, his leg work showing great improvement in comparison to his time on the streets. However, that didn't stop the kid from flinching at the shock of pain that most likely traveled his body. Contrary to the boy's beliefs, after a while, the nerves in your shins do die when you hit them enough. Deku was most likely halfway there, based on his minor reaction. With a few months of training, he could probably do this with no problem, only needing to gain the strength and power necessary to take the trees down with ease. After 10 strikes, the kid stopped, backing away and crouching down to massage both of his shins. A small hiss of pain escaped his lips in response. Purple and blue bruises were already forming in the area, and Aizawa had a feeling that Chiyo would have his head as soon as she saw the marks. Give up? Aizawa asked. Deku shook his head. No way. I'll give you 10 more strikes. I'll do it in 5. Deku spat back, glaring at the tree in contemplation. He stood once more and squared off. The following kick held a much greater force behind it. The tree splintered. Deku whimpered and leaned back down to grasp at his leg. "Don't overdo it, brat." Deku shook his head and stood again, circling the tree a few times before deciding on a point to strike. This wasn't technically against the rules, so Aizawa allowed it. Finding an opponent's weak points was a good tactic anyway. Another strike with the opposing leg sent more of the green bark flying. Kayama whistled in an impressed tune. Deku took a bit to compose himself once more before striking the tree again. The diamond thing tipped over, though some of the bark was still connected. At that moment, Chiyo appeared, a frown painting her face in a way that Aizawa had learned to mean a scolding. Deku didn't seem to notice as he squared off again. This time, the tree completely fell. "Make it 4. Deku said triumphantly as he looked up. The brat's face fell when he saw the small woman come at him. Of all the things you could help this boy with, you decide that ruining his body would be the best way to go. Recovery Girl hissed as she pushed Deku back to sit on the ground. It's really not that bad, the kid started. Recovery Girl glared at him, immediately quelling his protests. With an embrace to his hand, the bruises slowly dissipated. Deku wavered a bit before shaking his head to try to clear it of the hazy exhaustion that followed the old woman's quirk. Chiyo turned on Aizawa instantly, smacking her cane against his own shins a few times before huffing angrily. Just because you followed a ridiculously dangerous and archaic training regime doesn't mean that you have to teach Midoriya-kun the same irresponsible practices. It's not irresponsible, Aizawa defended, frowning at the livid woman. He will be facing a multitude of people with quirks that will easily take him down unless he trains his body to face them. The brat can make support gear for most emitter and transformation quirks, but this is a good step to prepare him against mutant types. The fighting style is similar. Why shouldn't the training be? Aizawa reasoned. The woman's head could have exploded for how red she got. You and Toshinori are the most stubborn, creatively stupid, painfully accident-prone attracting teachers I have ever met in my life. First with Mirio this morning, and now with Midoriya. Aizawa frowned at the comparison to All Might. He was a significantly better teacher than that buffoon. He had used this method countless times, always taking the small woman's scoldings and ignoring them with ease. Then, he had turned out some fantastic heroes. I swear, if I am notified one more time in my life that a student is scaling the 10th story of UA, I will personally ensure that Nezu is forced to give you disciplinary action. When we spoke of an intensive training routine, I did not mean your infamous hell training. Aizawa Shota, don't you dare roll your eyes at me. When would Chiyo ever give up on this useless plight? He wasn't harming his student any more than typical quirk training would. She was just mad because he focused on direct body contact instead of quirk usage. Recovery Girl never really appreciated the practice of martial arts training in all his time as a student, deeming it more dangerous than quirk practice a majority of the time. Aizawa had to disagree with the woman. He understood her point to an extent with evolutionary advancement. Intense workouts like these had quickly become things of the past. But just because something was new and resulted in fewer immediate injuries, didn't mean it was safer. Todoroki had yet to gain frostbite from his quirk, but that didn't mean that one wrong slip-up couldn't lead to him freezing to death. At least with physical training, you taught your body to resist being broken. With quirks, there was only so much you could do when it came to tolerance. Yamada will always risk going more deaf. Todoroki will always risk overheating or freezing if he didn't balance his two sides properly. Bakugo would always risk tendon damage to his wrists if he used too big of an explosion when his wrists aren't in just the right positions. Deku may not have to face pain if he is struck in the shin one day, pain now, in a controlled environment, for a significant reward later. Aizawa was not going to have this discussion with the woman again, however. He allowed her to rant before grunting. Thank you for your point of view. I'm not changing the plan. Aizawa told her at the end, just as he had with the past 3 students who went through hell training. Recovery Girl ultimately sighed in defeat. I'll be nearby. The woman grumbled. If he gets seriously hurt, it's on you. I know, Aizawa said. And he did. Every activity had to be carefully planned. The correct teachers had to be present should something go wrong. Aizawa had to constantly be on the lookout for signs that the kid couldn't handle what was being thrown at him, especially on the more dangerous tasks. Aizawa wasn't stupid or cruel, But he was a hero teacher. He had a job to do, and he would use everything in his power to ensure that the job was done correctly. This fact was even more important this time around. The boy before him had no special defense. Deku had no trump card. He had nothing to give him a one-up on villains. So Aizawa had to make sure he was capable of taking down the strongest opponent possible with just his body to work with. It didn't help that he had already failed the child. Thus far, Aizawa was going to make sure that didn't happen again. He was going to help this kid achieve his dream, no matter how many times he got scolded by the elderly healer. It wasn't illogical. He had seen Deku in action. He had seen the potential. Deku could become a hero. He just needed the chance. The other teachers that had gathered around the group looked at Aizawa with a mix of emotions. Some pitied that he had to face the tiny devil in doctor's clothing, whilst others were impressed with lack of response to the woman's tirade. Ready for the next thing? Aizawa asked the boy, ignoring the looks. I was fine, the kid said evenly despite the scowl on his face. It was just some bruises. I know, kid. She wasted my stamina. We would have had you healed anyway. The next words were unintelligible as Deku stood, wiping himself of the dirt that he had been made to sit in. Aizawa pulled out one of his jelly packets and tossed it at the kid. For your stamina, Aizawa said, voice lilting slightly in a tease. Deku's scowl furthered, but he downed the packet anyway as the group walked. I thought the scolding would take longer. Aizawa mused, looking down at his watch. It's only 8:45. I had thought we'd be held up at least until 9 o'clock. So much confidence you have in your time schedules. The boy deadpanned, earning a few snickers from the other teachers. It just gives us an extra 15 minutes for the next task. Aizawa replied. Is the field set up, Cementos? The 1C homeroom teacher nodded. We are going to play a game next, Aizawa told Deku. The kid lit up with interest. The practice is to aid in balance, focus, and adaptability. The dark-haired teacher continued as they came across the field. Cylindrical pillars filled a small section of the field, all varying heights and width sizes. A single soccer sat to the side. Here are the rules. 1-on-1. The goal is to have the fall below the halfway mark of the shortest pillar on the opponent's side. You may use any section of body, but cannot use the same section twice in a row. If you catch and throw with your right hand, you cannot do the same the following round or else you lose a point. When you throw it must be above the level of the lowest pillar when it crosses to the other side, or else the point does not count if it falls to the ground. You may hold for up to 5 seconds, but then it must be thrown. You may bounce off the edges of a pillar, but you may not hang from the top of one. Understand? When do you win? This will be time-based. We will both start with 100 points. We can gain points by defeating the opponent or lose points by breaking the rules. I've never had a student get down to 0, but you are full of surprises. Deku huffed at the taunt and stuck out his tongue. Who wants to be a referee? I'll do it, Kayama called happily. I'll ref as well, Ectoplasm said, forming a few clones of himself. I can watch from multiple angles to take points away. Kayama, you can give the points. The woman nodded and everyone sat up. Oh, one more thing, Aizawa called out. The field will periodically be repositioned, so don't be surprised if the pillars start moving while we play. The game didn't seem too terribly difficult. It was actually pretty fun. Aizawa-sensei had only managed 2 points in the first 5 minutes, which seemed pretty good considering that the man had experience and Deku didn't. The strongest part was how Aizawa-sensei would purposefully throw in a way that would be easiest for Deku to reuse a body part. If he kicked with his right leg the previous time, Aizawa-sensei would aim the low and towards that side, making it all the more difficult to rebut. He also undershot or overshot on purpose, making Deku move around the arena without a break. Whilst Deku often took his 5 seconds with it, Aizawa-sensei would immediately send the DMN thing back, giving very little reprieve. Deku's first point was lost by holding on to the too long. The second point was lost when he reused the same hand to catch. The third point was lost when he hung off of one of the pillars when trying to reposition himself. 102.96 Kame-sensei called at the 5-minute mark. Come on Deku, you got this. Biased much? Aizawa-sensei grumbled as he punched at the D, making it fly overhead and force Deku back. As he jumped, the pillars began moving, forcing the boy to redirect his landing to a more sturdy surface. Deku quickly tried to take advantage of the movement, sending the spiraling to the side where one of Aizawa-sensei's pillars were rising. Deku got his first point. The game became much more intense past that point. At the 15-minute mark, Aizawa-sensei was winning 107-1-0. To Deku's credit, the man was finally pouring sweat, having to work strong to keep up with the smaller child. Deku's ch was heaving, and the early summer sun was becoming almost unbearable as the game continued. Both competitors' shirts clung to them like sticky nuisances, the looser parts of the clothing hindering their movements just enough for them both to huff every time they got in the way. Aizawa-sensei practically ripped off his shirt during the break. It was odd to see the man with so few clothes on when he normally covered 90% of his body with long sleeves and sweats. Aizawa-sensei was significantly more toned than Deku was, his muscles defined but lacking the buffness that most heroes work towards. The man before him had purposefully kept himself slim, however. The lean muscle allowed for more flexibility, greater speed, and the ability to be underestimated, especially with the aid of his shabby hero costume. Yamada-sensei was eyeing his husband with little regard to the others around him, practically drooling as he watched. Aizawa-sensei glared over at him for a second before choosing to outright ignore the man. The blonde pouted almost immediately before walking over and slinging an arm across Aizawa-sensei's shoulders. "Never thought you'd ever be out in the sun without a shirt on, Sho." Aizawa-sensei rolled his eyes. "I typically wouldn't." "The little listener's doing a good job at kicking your butt, isn't he?" Aizawa-sensei glared. "He's yet to win." "Maybe, but he's gotten pretty close. I think he may actually have a chance today." "What do you think, Mimiri?" Kayame-sensei smiled and shrugged. "Not sure. But if Shota is sweaty enough to warrant taking off a shirt, I'd say Izuku's got a good chance." Aizawa-sensei huffed before grumbling. "If this is about a FC King shirt, I'll just put it back on." "No, stay like this, babe," Yamada whined, batting away the black garment. "I rarely get to see you train like this. Give me something to live for." Kayame-sensei laughed, while a few of the other teachers shook their heads at Yamada-sensei's antics. Deku could only roll his eyes. "Are you guys going to let Aizawa-sensei play the next part of the game? Or are you going to hold him captive for the remaining 30 minutes? Yamada-sensei grinned. "If we prevent him from playing, you could win." "I can win by myself." Deku pouted. The teachers smiled mischievously at him. Yamada-sensei let Aizawa-sensei free with a tiny peck to his forehead. "I am always on your side, Sho, but I really hope the little listener wins." Yamada sing-songed happily. With that, Deku and Aizawa got back onto the pegs. The second half was similar to the first, and in the end, Deku's frustration at himself was beginning to overflow. With the frustration came more power behind his motions and a greater focus on the task. Unfortunately, this was not enough to pull a win. At the end of another 30 minutes, Aizawa-sensei was still ahead, the score 119-112. "Another win," Aizawa-sensei said in his monotone voice. "I thought you said you were going to beat me in something." Deku scrunched up his face. "The day isn't over." "No, it isn't," Aizawa-sensei agreed. "You aren't going to like the next thing." "I didn't like most of the other stuff," Deku grumbled, irritation emanating off of him in waves. Cementa-sensei smoothed the area, ridding the place of the cement pegs. "I know you do the horse position in your own training. This will be based on that, just a little more extreme," Aizawa-sensei said after the two had had a few sips of water. "Plus Ultra does not have to apply to everything, sensei." Deku grumbled. "You are complaining quite a lot for someone who wants to beat me," Aizawa-sensei drawled with a roll of his neck. Deku glared at the man but said nothing. "This will be time-based. Whoever makes it the longest without dropping all of their bowls will be the victor. If we hit the 2-hour mark, it will be whoever has the most bowls remaining." "Bowls?" "Once in the stance, a teacher will place ceramic bowls in key areas to make sure that you maintain it. Do you want me to show you first? Give you a few seconds lead?" Deku sighed. At this point, a few seconds would probably not matter much. Aizawa-sensei was much too confident for Deku to even think he could win this task. That isn't to say he wouldn't try his damnedest to do so, though. However, He wasn't going to pass up an advantage. Even heroes used advantages when they were given. So, Deku nodded in response to the man's question despite it being a hit to his pride. Aizawa-sensei took a steadying breath and squatted. His feet were slightly further than his shoulder width. His knees were even with his hips. His back was straight, and he faced forward. To add on to the normal stance, the man stuck his arms straight out in a T shape, palms down. Ectoplasm placed ceramic bowls on both knees, his upper arms, his hands, and one on his head. Just looking at the position made Deku's body scream with pain. But the boy copied. He could do this. This was basic endurance and strength training. He could do this. How many more tests were there? As Deku moved into position, his shirt stuck to his skin once more and Deku finally bit the bullet and threw it off. It wasn't like anyone would see the scars lining his back at this time of day other than the teachers. The staff had all already at least seen pictures of damage in that area. Or at least, he thought they had. The small intake of breath from behind him was not lost on the boy. Self-consciousness swirled in his gut when he looked back to find Ectoplasm Sensei and 13 looking at him. I see can put a BB back on, if you are uncomfortable. Izuku whispered, trying to make himself look a little smaller. 13 jolted back slightly at his words and shook their head and hands frantically. Oh no, I'm so sorry. You don't have to, Midoriya-kun. Izuku wasn't convinced. He looked back at the shirt he had just thrown off, feeling incredibly stupid for thinking it was okay. He moved to put it back on when a voice interrupted his train of thought. I said a few seconds, brat. Don't stall. Izuku jumped at Aizawa-sensei's words, turning back to look. He made one last glance at the shirt on the floor before turning away from it. Next time, I'll immediately call for a forfeit, Aizawa-sensei said as Izuku began to go into the stance. Deku glared at the man in turn. I didn't take that long. Long enough to cheat. Deku took the stance, biting back an angry huff as Ectoplasm Sensei walked forward with the bowls. As soon as all the bowls were placed on both participants, the 2-hour timer was set. The other teachers lost interest for a while, most having brought lesson plans with them to work on during the more boring parts of the training. So, for the first 30 minutes, the only sounds were steady breathing, the scribbles of pen on paper, and the tap-tap of laptop keys. At 32 minutes, Deku's first bowl fell. His left upper arm had been shaking with the strain, his muscle tensing and spasming just enough to knock the thing off. He couldn't even voice his frustration as if he moved his head. He'd lose a second bowl. It wasn't fair. He hadn't moved out of position. But then again, Aizawa-sensei's bowls would do the same if his muscles grew weak and started contracting as well. At the 4 to 5 minute mark, Deku had to bite back the stomach acid that was rising in his throat. His body was not fond of this strain, and it was letting him know in very clear terms. Come on, little listener. You've got this. You can totally beat Sho in this one. Yamada-sensei cheered him on. At the 48-minute mark, he lost his second bowl, the other upper arm contrasting in the same way. I think you spoke too soon, Yamada. Snipe-sensei said. Aizawa's never lost more than 2, and we aren't even at the hour mark yet. The kid will probably lose more. Deku grit his teeth. He couldn't lose anymore. He couldn't. He had to win this, but Snipe-sensei's words rang through his head on repeat. It almost seemed hopeless as his arms continued to shake. Thus, it came as a big surprise when, at the hour mark, Aizawa-sensei lost 2 of his bowls at the same time. The arm that had been severely damaged at the USG simply gave out all at once, dropping down and hanging limply for a little too long before the man managed to put it in the proper resting position on his thigh. The other teachers were looking at him in shock. Yamada-sensei frowned, jolting forward a bit, as if to check on his husband before thinking better of it. Aizawa-sensei was probably already scolding himself. Yamada-sensei's concern would make this worse for the other man. He may never be the same. Recovery girl's words swirled in his mind. Deku, too, had jumped at the sound and had to fight down the urge to check on his teacher very. He was fine. Aizawa-sensei was fine. He was still in physical therapy. Muscle weakness was to be expected. Deku couldn't help but notice how the arm still spasmed slightly for the remaining time, though. At 1 hour and 15 minutes, Deku's left arm gave out. Not 5 minutes later, his right one did as well. He was down to only 3 bowls whilst Aizawa-sensei still had 5. He could only hold out hope that Aizawa-sensei's other arm gave out as well, though hopefully not in the same manner as the first had. The man's right arm was still trembling. That couldn't be a good sign. He had pushed too strong. Hopefully he wouldn't do the same with the other limb. Especially now that Izuku had failed so utterly keeping his own arms up. Deku's entire body was screaming at him. It was a constant struggle to bite back the bile that was constantly rising in his ch-san. The sun was beating down on him without mercy. The heat just enough to make him feel lightheaded. The boy had had his eyes closed for quite a while, trying to meditate through the pain, but his mind was starting to fuzz from the strain. Coherent thought became a challenge, and the wilder, crazier notions started springing up now that his mental filter had been worn down. Somewhere, in the back of his mind, Deku realized that if he fell too far into this particular headspace, he would give up. Thoughts of "what's the point" were already filtering through his mind. So the boy chanced the bowl on his head and began whispering to himself to stay focused. He dug into his hero knowledge and started spouting off old analysis of each teacher. Eventually, he just went straight for All Might having the most knowledge on the number one hero. At some point Deku no longer had any concept of how long they had been going. Another bowl of senseis fell. The man's other arm dropped to his side. It was shaking, but not as badly as the last one had. Luckily, he was capable enough to place it in the correct resting position immediately. Deku almost wondered if he had dropped that one on purpose. Unfortunately for the boy, the sound had shocked Deku, making him jump a little and yelp the bowl from his head, becoming a victim to his surprise. The scowl that he felt across his face had some of the teachers turn away to hide their poorly concealed laughter, using his blunder to hide their concern for Aizawa-sensei from both the dark-haired teacher and themselves. The kid was doing incredibly well. The horse stance was not easy by any means. Most civilians were capable of lasting 5 minutes tops. Hero students were expected to be able to achieve 30 by the end of their second year. The only student to make it past the 4 to 5 minute mark thus far had barely made an hour. Deku was nearing 2. Sure, he had lost some of his bowls, but Aizawa had too. A fact that he was really kicking himself over. His arms simply weren't what they were before the Uschi. It was frustrating to say the least. His right arm had given up without warning. Of course, he had halfway expected this. His physical therapy had been going well, but this was pushing things. The arm had gone completely numb a few minutes before it dropped, and it took a lot of effort just to set his hand back onto his thigh in the proper resting position. He really hoped he hadn't pushed things too far. Chiyo would have his head. Hell, his ashi would be worse. Thus, when the other arm started going numb, he purposefully let that one drop. No point ruining physical therapy for both of his limbs. It was annoying to say the least. By lowering his second arm, he was tying with the kid. That is, until the kid jumped from the sound of the crashing, losing his head bowl in the process. Aizawa couldn't stop the grin that spread across his face. The remaining bowls were the easiest to keep situated. He would win again. The kid had started mumbling a little while before he dropped his second arm. Incoherent strings of hero facts and analysis met Aizawa's ears, and the man nearly snorted when All Might became the main topic. Did Deku even realize that he was talking about the hero he claimed to despise? Then again, it made sense. If this was a form of meditative focus for the kid, it would be easiest to focus on the thing he knew most about. All Might had a lot of information to spout off due to his multitude of public villain fights. He also used to be Deku's favorite before Yua, meaning the kid had probably studied his hero work religiously. It was certainly interesting to hear the kid's ramblings. Deku was good with analysis. He excelled at dissecting tactical situations and formulating how to use his previous knowledge to make his own plans. He could be a MSTR of copying techniques, if the skill was given the chance to be refined. Aizawa would greatly encourage the kid to do so. However, that most likely meant that Nezu would take over training for the child. Aizawa was good at battle analysis, sure, but Nezu was the king. He'd leave it up to the kid to decide if it was worth the consequences to take on that endeavor. The other teachers continuously glanced at the two. Concern lined their faces as they glanced at the both of them. The kid was very obviously starting to struggle more. His breathed breath rang out along with the mumbled words. Aizawa sighed as he noticed the shaking that the boy's body was experiencing. Deku was also pushing himself far beyond his limits. Stubborn. It made Aizawa proud. Would this be the task to make Deku puke? No, probably not. That probably wouldn't occur until after lunch. Uphill weighted running was a beach. Before he realized, the timer went off. Aizawa collected the bowls off his own head and knees before standing. Deku simply fell to the ground, letting the bowls crash and shatter around him. The boy's entire body was shaking to the point that Aizawa was impressed the kid was even capable of holding his torso up with his arms. His own body was shaking too, of course, but it was much easier to hide with the practice he had. I win, Aizawa said flatly. The responsive punch into the ground was unexpected, but not surprising. The kid could have tied with Aizawa if he hadn't jumped at the sound of the bowls crashing. That alone was an impressive feat, but he didn't think the kid would appreciate the sentiment right now. Yamada diverged on Aizawa almost immediately after he addressed Izuku. A frown seemed permanently etched on his face as he gently took Aizawa's right arm and inspected it. The diamond thing had yet to cease its quivering. You should go see Chiyo, Yamada said, massaging the scar on his elbow. I'm fine, Aizawa said, starting to pull away. Yamada's grip tightened and he scowled. Let me rephrase that, he said darkly. You are going to go see Chiyo. Aizawa would be lying if he said the tone didn't scare him to some extent. He felt like a small child being scolded by a very upset parent when Yamada did that. So, Aizawa bowed his head a little, looking off to the side before giving a small nod. Whipped, Kayama said with a small laugh as she passed to go help Izuku. When he arrived at the infirmary, Aizawa wasn't exactly sure which was worse, Yamada's look and tone, or Chiyo's. The woman immediately swatted him with her cane a few times when he entered with Hizashi. I told you, the woman huffed. I warned you that your hell training was irresponsible. You don't even know why I'm here yet, Aizawa shot back. The small woman leveled him with a glare that could have frozen over hell. I have been a doctor longer than you have been potty trained, she hissed. You don't think I can see the obvious tremors coming from your arm? You don't think I noticed the way your fingers are unwittingly twitching? How stupid do you think I am? Aizawa couldn't quite meet her eye after that. Sit on the bed, the woman snapped. Chiyo inspected his arm for a while before sighing. The muscles are probably just overworked. I'll wrap it. See, I told you I was fine, Aizawa mumbled to Hizashi. The resounding smack to the back of his head was probably deserved. You are not fine, Chiyo huffed, shaking out her hand from where she had slapped him. Your arms were completely crushed. Your tendons were snapped. Your nerves were damaged to the point where I am still not sure how they will affect you in the long run. The woman scolded. You may be healed, but you are far from fine. I am telling you right now, if you push yourself too strong, too fast, you may lose function. I'm assuming you like your arms, yes? Aizawa grunted in response, turning away from the woman. Then take better care of yourself. Hizashi, I give you permission to knock him out if you have to today. If he can't control the trembling in his arm again, he needs to stop. I obviously can't stop him from completing the competition, but you can make sure he doesn't push too strong. I'm sure Kayama would be willing to put him to sleep. Yes, ma'am, Yamada said seriously. Aizawa groaned but didn't fight against his new rules for the day. Deku felt nauseous. His stomach coiled as he was helped back to the dorms for lunch. It was almost pitiful how he had to lean on Kayame-sensei in order to walk back. His legs felt like noodles as he forced himself to walk back. He was lightheaded. The world spun a little as he forced himself to take step after step. A P&D headache had formed behind his eyes, and his mouth was dry. Dehydration? Heat? I need water, Deku said. And sugar. Kayame-sensei nodded, taking on almost his full weight as she helped him up the few stairs into the dorms. Izuku didn't even bother trying to make it to the table. He sat down in the hall, pressing his back to the cool wall and leaning his head back to try and ease the black spots that had started dancing behind his eyes. It was a little annoying what a drop in adrenaline could do. The sweet chemical nectar did so well to stave off these annoying symptoms of strain. Now that it was gone, however, the full force of his body's anger at being overworked was letting itself known. Deku, Kayame-sensei said after a few minutes. Izuku jumped at the sound. He must have dozed off, or passed out. He'll go with dozed off. The woman was kneeling in front of him with a mug of water. I know you probably want something cool, but warm water will be better for you to digest. I added sugar to it. Izuku groaned low in his throat at the idea of drinking something warm, but took the drink anyway. It wasn't steaming lukewarm at best, but he'd been holding out hope for ice water. Kayame-sensei smiled sympathetically at him before presenting a bag of ice and setting it over his neck. Thanks, Izuku murmured. Did you faint? The woman asked, her smile looking more mischievous than it had previously. We are going to agree that I took a short nap. Deku snapped back. No room for disagreement. Kayame-sensei laughed lightly before agreeing to follow that story. After downing the sickly sweet and unfortunately warm water, Izuku finally stood from his spot on the floor. He wasn't shaking nearly as much as he had been, and the room didn't spin around him. From there, he was finally able to make it to the dining hall, where Lunch Rush had lunch ready for him. Izuku ate every bite without complaint. When he finished, Aizawa-sensei finally entered the room. His arm was wrapped up, making Izuku do a double take. What? Are you hurt again? Izuku asked, eyeing the bandages. It's fine, kid. Chiyo is just being cautious. Yamada-sensei huffed at his words, stomping past while muttering under his breath. Cautious my butt. Stubborn idiot. Can we still do the CH challenges? Aizawa-sensei nodded. Maybe you'll actually have a chance now. Deku glared at Aizawa-sensei, sticking out his tongue at the man instead of responding very. While Aizawa-sensei ate, Deku slowly relaxed all of his muscles to ensure that he would be capable of doing the next task without too much difficulty. The boy even took a page out of Aizawa-sensei's book and managed to catch a couple minutes sleep at the table while he was waiting. At 13:25 sharp, Aizawa-sensei woke him and dragged him to a training area that Deku had never visited. It was a large, gated area, a little ways from ground beta. However, instead of a city landscape, a tall mountain stood before them. One side was smooth, covered in mud, dirt, and grass. The other side was a hanging rock cliff. Have you ever heard of death sprints? Aizawa-sensei asked when they arrived. No, Deku stated. They sound awful. They aren't too terrible. Aizawa-sensei responded with a small smirk. You start at the base of the hill, and then sprint to the top and back. 10 reps. That actually doesn't sound bad at all, Deku said in surprise. He looked back at the hill, and then back towards Aizawa-sensei. Hills were more difficult, but Deku and Aizawa-sensei were used to working vertically as well as horizontally. With their current fitness, this exercise would be too easy in comparison to the others. What's the catch? Deku asked, suspicious. Aizawa-sensei's grin was feral. You will be wearing weights. Kayame-sensei sing-songed as she walked forward, dragging a bag behind her. Originally, we had wristbands and ankle bands made for this purpose, but Recovery Girl has forbidden Shota from placing that strain on his arms. Kayame-sensei said. So, we have vests instead. They are actually a bit heavier, since the weight will be distributed more easily. Of course, you can still go with the wristbands, Izuku. Deku corrected before moving to look in the bag. His hand twitched around the wristbands he already wore before he decided on the vest as well. That way it's fair, Deku murmured, though the voice in the back of his head poked fun at him for being nervous to add more bands to his already occupied wrists and ankles. The vest weight could be adjusted. Both Aizawa and Izuku added on half their own weights to the vests, as per the Hell training rules. Deku was not happy when the suffocating thing was strapped over his CHC. It was already difficult to move, and he wasn't even going uphill yet. Aizawa-sensei, as always, seemed unconcerned by the limiter. This one is always intriguing to watch. Samantha-sensei commented. You just like watching the kids trip and fall. Ectoplasm-sensei replied. No, in fact, I prefer the part where they get back up. Samantha-sensei corrected, mouth forming a strong line in disapproval of his colleague's assumption. Ah yes, I like that part too, Kayame-sensei cheered. They are always so confident the first few times, like they could ever keep up. Then again, Izuku. Deku-kun actually has a good chance. Shota's and Deku's training is very similar in this sense, even if Deku-kun hasn't been practicing correctly. In all honesty, they stopped training around the same time, so they should be the same amount of regression. A true challenge, then. Shota, You think you can actually win? Yamada-sensei called, an amused smirk on his face. Aizawa-sensei scowled at the blonde. Yeah, Aizawa, ectoplasm stated. You haven't been doing as well today. I'm out of practice, not incompetent. Aizawa-sensei snarled back. Deku grinned at the antics. Think I could actually win? He asked, hopeful. The amused looks he got in return killed his hope almost immediately. It's either this, the reaction time training, or sparring. After that, we will be done with the contests. Aizawa-sensei said. So you better do your best. Deku grimaced. What do you think I've been doing all day? He grumbled. Losing. Aizawa-sensei responded with a smirk. And I've been giving you advantages on top of being injured. Deku huffed at the response, turning his head from the man. Inhuman, he claimed. All right, are you two going to start or what? Yamada-sensei cheered excitedly. 10 laps up, and then down the mountain. The hill itself wasn't ridiculously high, only about half a kilometer. And going down couldn't be too difficult. He could do this. He had to win this. Aizawa-sensei was ahead of him by the first lap. Going uphill was, well, an uphill battle. But going downhill was a treacherous balancing act. With the added weight, Deku struggled to keep himself from tripping and rolling down the hill, making his descent much slower than he had hoped. Deku was already struggling to breathe by his third lap. His stamina was just about shot from the other activities in the day, and his body was begging him to take it easy. Deku pushed on regardless. Thus far, Aizawa-sensei had yet to lap him, only about half a mountain ahead of him. On the fourth lap, Deku fell for the first time. He misstepped on his way back down the hill. The dirt under his feet skidded, and he couldn't catch himself. There were no trees on this side of the hill, giving him nothing to grab onto. He felt like a cartoon character as he rolled down the hill, head over heels. When he finally lost momentum and was able to stop, the world was spinning. His arms and legs were coated in dirt and scratches. He had to spit out grass and dirt, having taken in a mouthful during his tumble. You good, kid? Aizawa-sensei asked. He was already on his way back up the mountain again. However, the man had stopped to check on him. Deku nodded his head as he stood. Nothing broken, he muttered. Good. Watch your footing, Aizawa-sensei said before continuing his sprint uphill. Deku grit his teeth as he continued his way down. Aizawa-sensei still hadn't lapped him come the sixth lap, though he was closing in. At this point, Deku was just hoping to not be lapped. He was also half hoping that a tree root would appear to take Aizawa-sensei's pride down a notch. Deku was feeling nauseous once again, the half-digested food bubbling angrily in the heat of the early summer sun. It was now the hottest part of the day, which did nothing to help the boy. He felt shaky and the headache had come back full force. He should probably stop to get some water. But Aizawa-sensei hadn't stopped to do that yet. DMN. If only the man would slow down just enough for Deku to keep from getting lapped. Deku's wish came true when Aizawa-sensei lost his footing on his seventh lap, skidding a few meters, though it was significantly more controlled than the tumbles that Deku had faced thus far. He almost made it look purposeful. Watch your footing, Shota, Yamada-sensei and Kayame-sensei called out with laughter. Aizawa-sensei sent a rude gesture their way when he thought Deku wasn't looking. Deku took the moment to take a swig of water. Unfortunately, that had not been a good idea. The icy water further upset his stomach, the sharp temperature upsetting the overhot lining and making the sick feeling worsen. On Deku's ninth sprint uphill, his stomach heaved. He stumbled off to the side before falling to his hands and knees as his lunge came back up. His body quaked with multiple stomach spasms. It was awful. He wasn't one to puke often, but when he did, it always made him feel unclean. It was almost as if his insides were suddenly impure. Deku did his best to shake off that thought. He had 1.5 laps to go. He had to at least finish. He needed to finish, even if Aizawa-sensei was now about to pass him by. He had to finish. Deku stood up, preparing to go again, but he once more had to stop when another wave of intense nausea washed over him. This time, only stomach acid came up. His nose burned. His eyes watered and his breath heaved. Kid, Deku waved Aizawa-sensei away as he continued heaving. The Erasure hero refused to leave, however, kneeling down beside Deku and pulling back his hair as he heaved again. To Deku's horror, a whimper escaped his lips as his body continued to betray him. Suddenly, the weight around his St. lessened. Aizawa-sensei had unclasped the vest, removing the weights from it to give him some relief. Deku shook on the ground, eyes clenched shut so he wouldn't have to stare at his own vomit while he tried to calm himself. Time seemed to blur for a bit as he slowly attempted to calm his breathing and heart rate. Cold water gently splashed over his head and neck as he remained bent over. A room temperature bottle was set to his side in case he dared take a sip. As soon as he started to feel better, Deku sat up. "I can keep going," he said, throat scratchy and black spots dancing in his vision from the sudden movement. "I know you can, but let's take a second," Aizawa-sensei said, helping him into a more sturdy sitting position. The vest was removed completely, along with the shirt that he had put back on during lunch. A cool rag wiped at his face, starting at his forehead before moving to his nose and mouth, where sick still clung to his skin. "I'm going to put a cool rag on your back," Aizawa-sensei murmured softly. Deku only nodded, still a little too unaware to fully answer. Deku jumped away from the wet rag as it touched his shoulders. Aizawa-sensei whispered calming things to him, though, and eventually, Izuku relaxed. "Sorry," Aizawa-sensei sighed. "For getting us sick." "You don't need to apologize. I guessed this would happen. I should be able to keep GG going." "In a few minutes." Izuku shook his head. "No, right after. Other people can go alright after." "Not with this type of training," Aizawa-sensei said. "Every one of my students puked before this point and had to take a break. Only 4 held out until this challenge, and all of them puked by the 6th lap. You have proven better than them already. Don't apologize for your body responding how it should. MK. Try to drink something. Eat this if you can," Aizawa-sensei said, offering one of his jelly pouches. Izuku grimaced at the thought of putting anything into his mouth. He reluctantly grabbed the water bottle though, knowing he was probably dehydrated to some extent. "I'm gonna finish. Okay, kid," Aizawa-sensei said, offering the jelly pack again. "This will help. It's banana, so it should calm your stomach. The potassium will help with the dehydration, and the other nutrients will help with everything else." Izuku nodded his head and took a tiny sip of the packet. After a few more sips, he downed the whole thing, feeling energy return with each swallow. After the jelly packet, the water was much easier to tolerate as well. After another 10 minutes, Izuku finally stood. Yamada-sensei was sitting nearby, having brought the supplies that Aizawa-sensei had used to help Izuku. "Thanks," he said awkwardly, shifting on his feet and averting his gaze from the two men. Can I keep going? I want to keep going," Deku said. Aizawa-sensei assessed him for a minute before nodding his head and helping Deku restock the vest and put it back on. "I'll be waiting at the bottom," Yamada-sensei said with a small, hesitant grin. "Don't push yourself, little listener. You are doing so well already." "Where's the fun in that, sensei?" Deku shot back in a teasing tone, trying to ease his guardian's tension. Yamada-sensei shook his head. "Just like Shota, I swear. I don't know if I can handle 2. But he laughed as he headed back down the mountain. "Word of warning, don't forget where you puked. I can guarantee you don't want to slip in it," Aizawa-sensei said. "Sounds like experience." Aizawa-sensei snorted and rolled his eyes, but didn't deny the accusation. "I'll let you go ahead to where you were before you puked. You let me lap you after a 20-minute break, and I will never let you live it down." Deku nodded determinedly and sprinted off, heading back up the mountain. Aizawa-sensei did not, in fact, lap him, as Izuku made it down the mountain an entire second before he did. Deku didn't push as strong on his last lap, having already lost, but he still tried to be swift, opting to try and beat a made-up time in his mind. "You won me a bet, kiddo," Kame-sensei said when Deku finally finished. "I told them all that you'd last longer than the others. I've got your back." The woman winked at him before passing him a little bit of the cash since he had helped her win. "Technically, Yamada is the one who had the most faith. He said Midoriya wouldn't puke at all," Samantha-sensei said. "Who truly has his back?" Deku gave a wry smile as he finally took the vest off for the final time that day. "Alright, next task," Aizawa-sensei said. "Let's go inside." The following task focused on reaction speed. The goal was to catch arrows out of the air with your bare hand. The arrows had RBB points, so as not to harm Deku or Aizawa, and were to be shot by Snipe Sensei, as his quirk allowed for the best aim. Deku sat to the side to watch Aizawa Sensei. He had to catch as many of the 100 arrows as possible, all coming at different speeds, times, and locations. The man was surprisingly good at the task, catching a variety of the arrows, no matter where Snipe Sensei aimed. Of the 100 arrows, Aizawa Sensei caught an even 80. Next was Deku's turn. It took him a few rounds to get the idea of how to catch the things, but past that, he fared relatively well. Aizawa, Ectoplasm Sensei said in awe when Deku had completed his turn. Aizawa Sensei knit his brows in question, along with everyone else in the room. 79. He caught 79. Ectoplasm said. Deku groaned, sitting down on the floor as frustration coursed through his body. Damn it, he cried out, leaning back. I almost had you. Aizawa Sensei studied Izuku for a while before turning back to Snipe. Another round, he demanded. Deku sat up. Why? Are you really questioning it? I'm giving you another chance. Deku shook his head quickly and cleared the field for Aizawa Sensei to have his turn. The man seemed much more focused this time. However, he only managed 82 arrows. On Deku's second turn, his start was much less shaky than the first time, starting him off much stronger. When the last arrow had been shot and caught, he went out strong. A silence fell over the group as they waited for Ectoplasm Sensei to give the number. 82. Holly sit, Shota. Izuku might actually be better than you at this. Yamada Sensei said excitedly. Deku snorted. Strongly. We tied. Well, yeah, but you've never done this before, little listener. Shota's been doing this for years. Deku still wasn't impressed. He could have done better. He even had a second chance. If you had practiced before the first round, you may have beaten him. What ifs aren't reliable, Deku said with a shrug. Yamada Sensei and the others could be as excited as they wanted. He still lost. A villain wouldn't give me time to practice, he muttered. No, a villain would not let you practice. But your starting point is high. Refine it now, and you may be able to catch or redirect just about any attack from a weapon. Be proud of what you accomplished, brat. Aizawa Sensei scolded. Deku merely shrugged once more. Nezu chuckled low in his throat as he watched the video footage of Aizawa's hell training. Midoriya was keeping up well, though this was notably due to Aizawa's injuries. Still, it was a great feat for a first-year student to even be that close to the man. Despite the injuries, the child had a good baseline for his skills, despite the blunder in teaching that Nezu, Cementos, and Aizawa had forced on him. It was impressive to see the child struggle past the mistake. The most recent task was what currently held the principal's interest. Catching arrows out of thin air was no easy feat, especially when the arrows were all shot to different locations. Aizawa had trained for years to get to the point he was at, averaging 8,590 arrows in a typical run. With only one arm currently functioning correctly, the drop to 80 was to be expected. Midoriya, on the other hand, had never done the task before. Nezu replayed his run over and over, inspecting the child with growing mirth and interest. Whilst this test was supposed to focus on reaction speed, Midoriya was not actually using that skill. No, he was using analysis and prediction. Snipe's quirk did not bend bullets to have them hit a target. Instead, it directed the weapon to precisely target that which he chose to lock onto. This was why the man couldn't just throw a rock to hit a target. He lost connection with the rock. It was also why his quirk worked best with the faster-moving projectiles, such as bullets. Since the projectiles didn't bend out of the way, the faster they moved, the less chance of being intercepted. However, this quirk then held a major flaw. If one were to look at where the weapon was aimed, they could theoretically know where to go to avoid being hit. Of course, this had to occur after the projectile was released. With a bullet, it was nearly impossible to counter, but with an arrow, Midoriya was observing Snipe's eyes and weapon direction to determine where the arrows would go. Then, before Snipe would release, the child would already be in motion, hand already outstretched to catch the projectile. It was like a game of catch, more than anything. The fact that the child had trained himself to be able to see the slight tells of a person most likely pointed to his abuse, which was not a pleasing thought for the rat. But there was always a silver lining to every bad situation, And this seemed to be a major strand of silver in Midoriya's case. Nezu hit replay on the video once more, cackling to himself in the quiet of his office before turning to make his personal plans for the boy. I feel like you are making me eat more than normal. Deku grumbled as a banana, the actual fruit, not a jelly packet, was set before him. You are burning more calories. I literally just ate. I mean, I've been hungry all the other times today, so it was fine, but I really don't need this. Aizawa-sensei frowned at him and nudged the banana towards him again. Deku groaned, but took the fruit anyway. I think you just want me to throw up again. That is a very real possibility. Best to eat something so you aren't spitting up acid. I thought we were just sparring next. Deku shot back, looking at Aizawa-sensei sharply. Is sparring with Aizawa ever just sparring? Ectoplasm-sensei asked. Deku looked over at the maths teacher and quirked a brow at him. You and Aizawa-sensei should be on about the same level when it comes to hand-to-hand, right? That is your specialty. Ectoplasm-sensei shook his head. No, Aizawa has greater skill than I do. I typically rely on my quirk to help overwhelm an opponent. Aizawa can do no such thing, and thus must rely on his physicality more than I need to. Deku nodded at the explanation before looking around at the teachers. So Aizawa-sensei is the best at martial arts among the teachers. Think I could take one of you guys if you weren't using quirks? Aizawa may be better, but we are not so easy either, Midoriya. Cemento-sensei said calmly. Your CC kindness could lead you into trouble if you don't temper it. With what I saw yesterday, you could probably take on Nezu if he actually fought fair. Aizawa-sensei said. Probably. Deku scowled. Oh come on, none of the others? Tashinori might fall victim so long as he isn't using his quirk. Deku smirked. I could beat the number one, potentially. I would actually pay money to watch Midoriya-kun throw All Might again. Snipe-sensei said with a barked laugh. Aizawa-sensei grunted and shook his head at the other teacher, though a faint smile ghosted his lips. Wouldn't we all? Once he finally finished his snack, Deku stood, fully prepared to get his butt kicked, but determined to at least throw the teacher out of the ring once. However, Aizawa-sensei hesitated, observing Deku intensely before sighing. I need to talk with you first, brat. Deku looked at the teacher in confusion. We don't have to wear weights again, do we? No, Aizawa-sensei said. It is just normal sparring. Deku nodded and waited for the man to continue. With sparring comes being hit. Aizawa-sensei started slowly. I need to know if you can handle that. Deku scoffed. I can handle a punch, sensei. That's not what I mean, Aizawa-sensei said, his face growing more serious than it had most of the day. Will you be okay that I will be the one fighting you? Deku felt a little dense, but couldn't quite understand why. Sure, he said, the word tapering off. I need you to know at all times that I am not fighting you out of anger. I am not hitting you for punishment. Aizawa-sensei expanded. With the meaning thrown in his face, Deku finally understood. His shoulders tensed, and he frowned at the teacher before him. I know that, he snapped. You don't have to coddle me. If at any point you think I might be hitting you out of anger, you stop the spar. I'm not going to need to. Deku growled. If at any point you feel actual fear, you stop the spar. There's no point to these warnings. If at any point you may even have an inkling of the idea that I am upset or don't want you, you stop the spar. Aizawa-sensei said, voice rising slightly. Do you understand? Deku's ch was heaving, though he wasn't sure when his breath had begun to grow so heavy. I got it, he seethed. Aizawa-sensei didn't seem convinced as he looked Deku over, but ultimately, the man backed away. Pinning only. No out of bounds. You are past the point of needing that handicap. Or maybe you just don't want me to win again. Deku snarked. Aizawa-sensei rolled his eyes as he moved over to the wall panel. The man pressed a button, and mats raised from the flooring, providing a soft landing for when Deku would ultimately be thrown to the ground. Yua was plus ultra in every aspect, it seemed. Ready yourself. Aizawa-sensei commanded, taking a stance near the center of the room. Deku took a calming breath before walking forward and doing the same. Don't hold back, Aizawa-sensei said. I don't even know if I could, against you. Deku replied wryly. Begin. Cemento-sensei said, voice echoing across the room. Izuku wasn't even sure what had happened. 1 minute, he was facing off against Aizawa. The next his face was being pushed into the mat, and he was locked in a hold. He wriggled a little in an attempt to escape, but ultimately tapped out. Is that how Shinsu felt when they spared? Again? How exactly am I supposed to beat you when you are so much more advanced? What would count as a win? Because as far as I'm concerned, this is hopeless if we are using the normal point system. Deku said. Aizawa-sensei thought before a smirk formed on his face. I'll give you 3 points if you keep me on defense for more than a minute. 2 points for a hit that sends me back a few paces. 1 point for a hit that lands. Make it to 100 points before the 2-hour mark. I'll give you the win. Deku paused, thinking. 10 points if I pin you. A proper pin, then we have a deal. Deku nodded. Samento-sensei was busily jotting down the new rules with a slight shake of his head. The other teachers had all pulled up chairs seemingly from thin air to sit and watch. Don't you guys have jobs? Like teaching or hero work? Deku asked in annoyance. Nope, came a unanimous reply. You should at least manage 50, considering my injury. Aizawa-sensei taunted. Deku did not rise to meet the taunt, instead going back into stance. After the first failure, Deku had realized that Aizawa-sensei had used his own technique against him. It was much easier to dodge and parry once he knew what to look for. And yet, after only 2 minutes, Deku was eating the mat once again. Spar after spar, and Deku managed measly points throughout. He was exhausted from the day, and fighting with his teacher was no easy feat. His top time with the man was only 4 minutes, and Deku burned at the thought of how weak he truly was. After each spar, Aizawa-sensei would correct something: form, movement, choice of action, eye contact, openings, and so on. He never went a single match without some tip. It almost PSS'd Deku off more, if not for the fact that the man had done the exact same thing when Deku had been on the street. Despite the fact that training a vigilante is illegal, Aizawa-sensei had given Deku a few sessions here and there. He had trained the boy in safely landing hits and protecting the body, often focusing on 1 or 2 moves per session, all of which had saved his life many times over. This fact did not stop the growing frustration building in the boy, however. 4 to 5 minutes in, and only 23 points. At this rate, Deku would just barely reach the 50 mark that the man had taunted him with. Deku was determined to go beyond. 60, no, 70. Hell, 75. That was his first goal. But it seemed nearly impossible. That's the 4th time you've left your left side open. Aizawa-sensei scolded. Watch yourself. Deku grimaced at the words, but got back into position without complaint. His mind was starting to fuzz again as he fell into the rhythm of the challenge. His body ached, but it was dull in comparison to his will. Bruises started forming where his forearms and sides were continuously punched and kicked. The mental fuzziness grew stronger. He wasn't sure how much time passed, nor how many points he had gathered now. All he knew was that he was still standing. He was holding his own, and his reflexes were already quickening. His instincts were on high alert, and the boy was able to dodge much easier now. He thought he might hear cheering at some points, but ignored it in favor of his task. His mind was almost numb now. His only thought on defeating the person before him. Aizawa-sensei spoke, and Deku listened. He soaked in the corrections as if he were a sponge. He attempted to correct himself each time, though he sometimes fell back on old habits. Aizawa-sensei was patient, though sharp. His words did not baby Deku, but they weren't cruel. When at first, the boy and the man had taunted one another, Aizawa-sensei quickly ceased as the child's mind became more focused. Perhaps it was only because Deku wasn't very sparring either. How many times do I need to correct you on form? Keep your arms up. Just because you're tired doesn't mean that an enemy won't go for your heart. Do it again, and I won't hold back. Deku nodded, wiping at the sweat that had collected on his forehead. Right. He needed to keep his arms up. It didn't matter that they were screaming. He needed to protect his soft middle. He needed to make sure a fatal blow couldn't land. He had to do this so he could protect people, save people, help people. He had to do this so he could be a hero. Just as he truly fell into a steady rhythm, the timer sounded, jolting Deku back to full awareness. No, I just got into the groove, Deku complained. groaning as he sunk down onto the floor. 1 more hour. Just 1 more. Not going to happen, brat. Aizawa-sensei replied, a smug look on his face. Maybe by the end of the week, you can get 100 points by the 2-hour mark. Deku glared at the man before turning away with a huff. How many did I get? He asked Cementa-sensei. 84, Yamada-sensei cheered, cutting off the cement hero. That's really impressive considering you didn't pin Shota at all. The boy grinned to himself. At least I made it past 7 to 5. Don't tell me you were only going for 7 to 5, Yamada-sensei yelled. Don't you know that you have to aim for 100 in order to reach 100, little listener? He never would have reached 100 points. I'm not that pitiful. Aizawa-sensei drawled. His arm was faintly quaking once more, proving just how much of a challenge Deku had been. I don't know. Sho, you're slipping if you ask me. Kayame-sensei teased. Deku grinned even wider. Yeah, sensei. I might just be able to take you on completely by the end of the year at this rate. Aizawa-sensei huffed at the statement. I'll believe that if you can actually beat me in a few challenges at the end of the week. Now get some water. I need to talk with you about the next task. Aizawa said. The kid stuttered in his movements, looking at the man with pure exhaustion. I thought sparring was the last thing. It is the last challenge. I'm not competing with you for the next part. Why not? Water, Deku. Deku huffed but did as asked. Aizawa took the time to massage his arm, urging the tremors to stop. He did not want to make another visit to Recovery Girl today. To his luck, the quaking stilled after a minute. Hizashi, Kayama, and the other teachers were praising the brat when Aizawa walked over. The kid grinned widely from the positive attention and chattered back to the teachers excitedly. He was proud of himself, if a little frustrated at not winning the arrow-catching game. It was nice to see, though Aizawa needed to watch carefully to ensure the boy wasn't becoming CCKY. The kid was good, yes, but still lacked in many areas. Growing CCKY now would do him no good. Problem child. Aizawa called as he walked up. You have a choice to make. A choice? I spoke with Nezu. The kid flinched slightly at the mention of the principal, but Aizawa quickly moved on. And we decided that you could still choose an extra area to practice this week despite starting at a lower base level than we had hoped. What do you mean? You get to practice something extra this week. We are giving you the opportunity to build your knife skills, learn to shoot a gun, get licensed in pressure points, or anything else you want to do. But I need an answer now so we can go ahead and get started. Wait, seriously? The boy asked, eyes blowing wide. But I thought we had to focus on getting me back to where I was when I came to UA. We do. But doing this will give you an extra edge and something to look forward to at the end of the day. Can I do knife training and pressure points? Aizawa sighed. You won't have enough time, kid. Choose one. The boy slumped a little, but soon fell into his mumbling as he thought through the options. Aizawa couldn't even hope to make out the words the child was saying this time around. He had grown quieter with his mumbling and his speech had grown faster, making the sounds more eerie, in a way. Aizawa waited patiently for the kid's answer, though, not interrupting the child. Pressure points. Deku finally said, voice clear once more as he looked up at Aizawa confidently. I think they'd be the most helpful right now, and I already have some type of grasp on wielding knives, so it isn't as essential. If I can get licensed, then that's an entirely new skill to add. And you won't get mad at me during training if I use it. Fine. Aizawa conceded. Then let's go. You can do book work tonight to brush up on your prior knowledge before trying practical application tomorrow. Later that night, Izuku tucked himself into his bed. Chado curled by his side, kneading into his stomach as he slowly drifted off. A sudden vibration jolted him out of the light slumber, however. The device on his bedside table was lighting up purple and vibrating in a pattern. Shinsu. Izuku reached over and held the device in his hand, waiting for the message to end. He only caught the tail end of the other boy, asking if Izuku was awake. Izuku replied quickly. I think my arms are going to fall off. Izuku snorted. If only Shinsu had been around for the hell training. Aizawa-sensei nearly murdered me today. I can't wait for tomorrow. It will be awful. But I'm learning so much. Is this what being in the hero course is like all the time? I wouldn't know. You've been in about as long as I have. The device in Izuku's hand vibrated for a long time. Izuku imagined the small smirk and accompanying snort that was Shinsu's version of a laugh. I gotta go. Wisecrack does checks to make sure we get enough sleep. Good night, then. Night. Izuku carefully set the device back on his bedside. With his muscles aching and his head spinning with exhaustion, Izuku felt at peace as he drifted off to sleep. If only that could have lasted. The last 2 days had been a sweet hell. Every movement hurt, but brought with it the satisfaction of knowing he was growing stronger. It was almost unheard of to be showing clear results after such a short amount of time. But Deku was already gaining on Aizawa-sensei's times that had been recorded during the hell training. The teacher was brutal during the day. Corrections and reprimands spilled from the eraser hero's mouth, at a steady rate, rarely allowing a compliment to slip through. The compliments, though, were made that much more important to the boy when he received them. He focused on the small handful of positive affirmation to push through the strain. His lessons and pressure points were advancing quickly, mostly due to his prior knowledge. With his advancement, Deku may be able to be licensed in the art by the end of the week. Aizawa-sensei was even letting the boy use the techniques during their spar training, though Deku had yet to knock the man out with a pressure point. The sparring was certainly the strongest and most entertaining part of Deku's day. He had rarely had the chance to fight with someone stronger than himself since living at Ua. The downfall of fighting the older man was the frustration it brought. Deku had yet to win a fair fight, and it grated on every nerve in the teen's body. The only time he had managed to take down his teacher had been when Aizawa-sensei had hesitated after a particularly strong hit had made Deku flinch back. The teacher had been overly cautious with Deku since day one when it came to the sparring. Before each session, Aizawa-sensei would force Deku to promise to stop a match should he become frightened or view the spar as a form of punishment. It irked the boy that Aizawa-sensei treated him as if he were fragile. And yet, here the man was, saying the same words for the 4th day in a row. I got it, Deku snapped. You don't have to say this shit every F-seeking day. I'm not some pitiful brat. Aizawa-sensei sighed as he looked at the boy. With a shake of his head, the teacher moved to the center of the room and got into a starting position. Deku hesitated at the action before going to join the man. He was exhausted from the other activities of the day, though his body was still thrumming with adrenaline. Every sense was heightened as he watched Aizawa-sensei closely, monitoring every twitch of his body. The two seemed to move at the same time as they both leaned in for a hit. Aizawa-sensei immediately took the upper hand, sending Deku back multiple paces from the sheer power of his attacks. The sparring was only scheduled to be 2 hours, but it seemed much longer in Deku's mind. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 15 minutes, the boy finally got on the offensive. Deku drove Aizawa-sensei back, kicking low to throw the other off balance, only to have to block a downward jab. On and on the sparring went until Deku fell into the familiar fuzz as his instincts began to take over. This was always his favorite time, as his mind seemed to take a back seat as his body moved instinctually. The only reason the hell training was working as well as it was due to the fact that Izuku's body already knew how to move in the way that was needed. His only issue had been lack of practice, not lack of skill. Aizawa-sensei continued to correct certain things about Deku's movements, but the comments came less frequently, or perhaps the boy simply didn't consciously comprehend that they were spoken. With each passing fight and each pin by Aizawa-sensei, Deku pushed himself stronger. He needed to be better, faster, stronger. He needed to prove himself, to show he was capable, to not be a burden. So on he went, his mind blank as he fought tooth and nail against the elder man. You will never be enough to help anyone. Deku paused a moment too long from the sudden, unbidden thought. A fist slammed into his side, Deku failing to block. Aizawa-sensei didn't even pin him, instead just taking a step back. Deku looked up at the man slowly as soon as the world stopped spinning from the blow. Sensei, why did you freeze? You didn't even try to block. Deku shook his head a little, unsure of what to tell the man. He'd had thoughts like this plenty of times. This one had just come out of nowhere. He wasn't prepared to be interrupted when he was so focused. Sorry, Izuku murmured. GG got distracted. Aizawa-sensei's eyes narrowed at the pitiful excuse. Go get some water, brat, the man said after a moment. Izuku didn't fight the decision. He wasn't exactly sure why. But he was incredibly unnerved all of the sudden. After a short water break and a firm shake of his head, the boy went back to the mats, going into stance once more. Aizawa-sensei looked at him with an uncertain gaze, observing every twitch of Izuku's body as if trying to decipher an encrypted message. "Are you ready or not, sensei?" Deku asked, the mask being pulled up sharply as he faced the older man. Aizawa-sensei merely grunted in response, taking position as well. It didn't take long for Deku to fall back into the lull, his momentary weakness forgotten as he faced down his opponent. The boy's body was trembling, but he pushed stronger, ignoring the signs of fatigue. Hell training was supposed to be difficult. He wouldn't give. He couldn't. He had to be better. He couldn't risk being banned from the hero program. After the USG and the sports festival, he was on thin ice. This was his chance. If he could show growth, maybe Mizu would see his determination once more. Maybe the teachers could be proud of him again. Deku's thoughts that had once almost been non-existent were now spiraling in his mind. His focus slipped. He dodged a punch and dived to the side, but Aizawa-sensei was on him again in an instant. Never backing off. Never letting Deku collect his thoughts. Unrelenting. Brutal. Never. Deku grit his teeth as he moved forward. He landed a solid hit, but it wasn't enough to make the teacher stumble back. He ducked to evade a jab and rolled backwards when his block failed. Back on his feet, and the man in front of him was attacking again. Dodge, parry, punch, redirect, turn, knee, block, swipe, kick, dodge. An ongoing dance that never seemed to have an end. Deku was suddenly desperate. He couldn't quite remember exactly why he was forcing his body into overdrive, why he was fighting, who he was fighting. He just knew he had to win. It was important. He had to win to prove them all wrong. To prove himself wrong. He could do this. He would protect people. He had to. Empty green eyes staring back at him, unblinking. He had to protect everyone. A man, taller than himself, coming towards him. Eyes narrowed. Angry. So angry. Never enough weak, useless stop. But things had already stopped. Deku was on the matted flooring. Aizawa-sensei was kneeling in front of him, his apathetic face still showing his concern as he looked Deku over. The boy was shaking, though he wasn't sure if it was from his exhaustion, or if it was from the images that had passed through his mind, the voices. "Kid, look at me." Deku did. Emerald gaze met onyx, and the world was suddenly much calmer. Sensei's eyes were not green. Sensei's eyes were not light brown. Sensei's eyes were not angry. They were sad. One moment, the kid seemed to fall back into his focus. His reflexes heightened, and his skill level increased, as he let instinct take over a majority of his movements. Then he had flinched. It was small. It would have been insignificant for most people. But Aizawa had been watching this child closely for too long to have not noticed the true unease behind the motion. Aizawa had stopped immediately. He would not hit this kid if Izuku thought Aizawa was upset. It all happened in less than 2 seconds. Aizawa stopped. The kid, put off guard by the sudden lack of action, stumbled, falling to the ground. A small intake of breath. When Aizawa stepped forward, the child's entire body shook, flinching away from him. Words whispered on his lips, even as the kid clenched his eyes shut. Not enough. Weak. Useless. Each syllable was barely audible, even to Aizawa, who was right next to the child. Kid. The boy flinched back, slapping away Aizawa's outstretched hand despite his eyes still being glued shut. His body was still running on instinct. He breathed another, short inhale before calling out. Stop. Then the green eyes opened, fear lacing every inch of his features as he looked at Aizawa, as if the eraser hero had murdered someone before Deku's eyes. Perhaps, to Izuku, he had. Kid, look at me, Aizawa commanded. He needed to ground the boy before this devolved into a worse panic attack. He needed to show the boy that it was safe. Recognition followed soon after Izuku looked up, the fear vanishing in the face of overwhelming relief. At least when the boy realized who Aizawa was, it wasn't fear that was on his mind. However, the boy had mistaken him for someone who did cause him fear. Dr. Ayuchi had warned Aizawa and Yamada that Izuku might not react well to sparring with either of them. He had grown to see them as parental figures, something that would make him susceptible to falling into old memories should a trigger appear. Hitting this kid even to spar was a risk. Aizawa should not have taken the risk. "Are you okay?" Aizawa asked softly, brushing the sweaty locks out of the boy's face. Visuals, sound, touch. All these things were necessary to keep him present. Izuku nodded slightly. "Say it out loud." "Yeah," the boy whispered. Tears welled up in his eyes, even as he voiced the confirmation. The anger that came with the Deku persona flashed across the child's face for only an instant before disappearing. Izuku rubbed at the tears cascading down his cheeks as he sniffled quietly. Sorry. I didn't." Aizawa sat back on his heels, letting himself fall back onto his butt so he could be more comfortable. He let the kid relax on his own time, simply being nearby while the child tried to calm himself. Every twitch and every shift the boy made was closely observed to ensure that the boy wouldn't fall into the dark headspace again. Eventually, Izuku looked up, tears drying on his cheeks. "I'm sorry," he said again. "For what?" Aizawa sighed. "If for, I didn't listen to your W warning at the start." "It's fine," Aizawa said. "I don't think you had much time to warn me to stop. I say should have realized. It's so stupid." "You aren't stupid," Aizawa scolded. "Everyone is different and sometimes we don't see things until it's too late." The boy nodded, though he very clearly didn't believe Aizawa's words. "I messed up training. Strongly. I don't know why that happened. I had a feeling that something like this might happen at some point," Aizawa said, voice low. "But I decided to spar with you anyway." The kid shook his head, a grimace crossing his features. "I shouldn't be so weak. I say shouldn't. I have to be better. What if Nezu saw? What if he thinks I can't do this? I'm trying, sensei. Really? I know, kid." Aizawa cut Izuku off. "You are doing well. You don't need to push yourself to this point." "But I do. I have to. I have to be better than this." "Izuku. I'm sorry. I'll be better, I swear." Aizawa sighed. The kid wasn't in any state of mind to have a fight about his current worth or ability. So, the man simply stood and offered the teen a hand. "Go shower before your lessons. But there's still time left for sparring. We are done for the day." "But sensei, no. Go shower, brat. I'm not fighting you on this." Izuku looked away, nodding his head slowly as he turned towards the exit, silent. Aizawa walked back to the dorms with Izuku. The boy was silent, but the slightest sound had him jumpy. At one point, Aizawa's arm brushed against the child's, and the kid nearly jumped out of his skin. Once the two arrived back at the dorms, Aizawa sent Izuku to go study to prepare for his lesson with ectoplasm on pressure points. He moved to the teacher's office, slumping in his chair with a grimace. Kayama and Hisashi were in the room as well, both turning to look at him when he entered. "You still have a while of sparring with Izu?" Kayama noted. "Yes." "Did the little listener get hurt?" "No." "Did something else happen?" Kayama asked. Aizawa sighed, putting his head in his hands as he thought through his answer. Would Hisashi be mad that Aizawa hadn't stopped the spar fast enough? Would Kayama judge the fact that he is training the boy in the first place? Was he doing something detrimental? Did he set Izuku back? Aizawa started before stopping and taking another breath. "The kid had a panic attack during sparring. I didn't think it wise to continue." "Is he okay?" Aizawa looked up at that. "Is he ever okay, Zashi? Is he ever content or happy?" "Shouta. I told you I keep seeking up. I told you I keep messing with him. You should have seen his face, Zashi. He looked at me. He was terrified. I should have never been the one to train him. I should never have sparred with him." "Where is this coming from?" Kayama asked, looking at Aizawa in concern. "Since when have you questioned your training methods? This kid is different." "Why?" "Because he has trauma." "Because I'm his parent," Aizawa said back, voice raising above his typical, even volume he tried so strong to maintain. Kayama and Hisashi's eyes softened. The therapist warned us, and I should have heeded her warning. She never said not to train him. She only said to listen. And you stopped training for the day." You did fine. He hasn't calmed down. He flinched when my arm brushed his. His past is scary. He isn't afraid of you, it's the things he remembers. I'm not sparring with him anymore. It's not worth it. I'm not going to hit him and bring back those memories. Then how is he going to learn? Hisashi asked. He wants to be a hero, and you are the best chance he has. Ectoplasm has a similar style. Snipe. I can call in a favor and have another underground hero come in. Shouta, don't be rash. Kayama scolds. I'm not being rash. Aizawa hisses back. I'm being perfectly reasonable. That kid has been hit by too many caretakers. He obviously can't handle it when I spar with him. I will find him someone else. I can't do both and have him feel safe. This is one instance, Kayama said. Maybe he's right, Kayama. It was always possible that Izuku wouldn't be able to handle Shota or I sparring with him. Maybe this is a good thing. But make sure you explain your reasoning well, so he doesn't blame himself. I'm proud you are thinking through this. But Hisashi, Aizawa is Izuku's best bet when it comes to training. And there are other options, Hisashi said. So long as he has a hand in his training, Izuku does not need to directly spar with Sho if either of them feel uncomfortable. Kayama sighs, but ultimately agrees. Aizawa leans back in his chair, thinking through his options as he contemplates the remaining 3 days of training. Aizawa-sensei wasn't a hole. A liar. An overprotective, inconsiderate, quirkist, a hole. And Deku was PSS. You promised. You said you would train me, and you are going back on your word. You're a piece of shit. A liar. Just like everyone else. UFC King BSTRD, Deku screamed. Whoa. Come on now, little listener, Yamada-sensei tried to soothe. Deku merely growled at the man. Every inch of his skin was thrumming with fury. He felt hot and light-headed out of control. This was his own fault. It was his fault for acting weak yesterday. His fault for being so pathetic. Now Aizawa-sensei wouldn't spar with him. None of the teachers would. Aizawa-sensei had asked Ectoplasm and Snipe, and both had refused. They thought Deku was weak too. Not worth their time. Even if it was his own fault, Aizawa-sensei was the one making the choice not to train him. So, his anger was directed there. I told you it was a fluke. I told you it wouldn't happen again. I apologized, Deku snarled. But he knew what was coming next. It had been over an hour since Aizawa-sensei had first told him he wouldn't be sparring with Deku today. Over an hour of hearing the same lame excuses. Acting out like this won't change my decision, Aizawa-sensei said in his same dull voice. He didn't even care. FC King Pratt. I don't think it's in your best interest to spar against me considering your past. FCKU, as if you actually give a sit, Deku screamed, slamming his fist against the wall, only for the drywall to give way, leaving a large hole. Izuku. Yamada-sensei's tone was warning. Deku couldn't give a sit right now. No. If you cared, you would train me like you promised you would. If you cared, you would let me push past this. Kid, I'm still going to train you. I just won't be the one sparring with you. What's the point if I'm not practicing with the best? Deku screamed. I can find someone of equal, sit. It was a whisper. The quietest Deku had gone since being told. His entire body shook. His face felt too hot. Tears prickled the back of his eyes, which only fueled his rage further. This was the first step. This was the first sign. They were going to give up on him. They were going to leave him. They were already growing tired of his stupid issues. It felt pointless, hopeless. The room was silent, except for Deku's harsh breathing. Other teachers had gathered in the living room, drawn by the sounds of Deku's tantrum. Aizawa-sensei stood by the doorway, Yamada-sensei close by his side. Protective. Deku was a danger. He may hurt Aizawa-sensei. He may become violent. They all knew. They all watched him with distrustful eyes. Glaring, painful, judging. Better to prove them right. Better to make them see how much of a monster he could be. Better to show what he was capable of. Then maybe it wouldn't be so bad that they grew so tired of him. Then he would deserve it. Then it would be his choice to be left. If Aizawa-sensei didn't want to train him, it was because Deku was lacking. If he was lacking, he wasn't good enough to be loved. If he wasn't loved, he wasn't kept. They were all liars. He didn't like liars. He could strike out now. He should. But his body was frozen to the spot. He couldn't move. He couldn't even scream anymore. If you were going to leave me for the wolves, then you should have done it a long seeking time ago. Why drag me along? Was it fun to mess with me? Was it fun to play with my emotions? Why even take me back from the bastos if you were just going to grow bored with me anyway? Deku hissed, low, threatening. The reply was not what he expected. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't mean or cruel or nonchalant. It was incredibly confusing, and it hurt. It hurt because it was a lie. It had to be a lie. It must be a lie. I will never grow bored with you. I will never give up on you. And I will never leave you, kid. You're lying. His voice was choked. Traitorous. Pained. I'm not. You know I'm not. Aizawa Sensei was staring straight at him, his eyes carving into his soul as if to demand belief. There was no twitch to his body. No rise of inflection in his tone. Every inch of his being screamed truth, but Deku's mind screamed lie. Why? Why won't you train me? I apologized. I said I was sorry. I didn't mean to break down yesterday. I will do better. I won't be weak again, I swear. Why are you leaving me? I don't understand. If you give up on me with training, what will stop you from giving up on me in other areas? 3 steps closer. Bridging the distance. Hands out to the sides, non-threatening. I'm not leaving, kid. I'm not giving up on you. I said I'd train you and I will. I promise. I'm not breaking that promise. I just won't be the one doing the sparring. You didn't do anything wrong. I just think it will be better for everyone in the long run. I'll find people to spar with you, and I will be in the room. I'll correct you and teach you like I always have. I just won't be the one doing the hitting. It will be good to have different fighting styles train with you anyway. Better to have a variety. But I swear, I'll still be there. Izuku tugged at the back of Deku's mind. He was begging Deku to back down. Don't ruin this. Don't make things worse. Give Aizawa Sensei a chance. And Deku listened, his body relaxing as the words the man before him spoke finally got through. He felt tired and shaky and weak. He'd been training all morning and hadn't finished lunch since Aizawa Sensei had told him midway through the meal. Being emotional took a lot of energy. No wonder he tried to keep those locked away while he was on the street. What a waste of stamina. You promise? I promise. FF for real. Yeah, kid. For real. Okay. Aizawa let out a large sigh as the kid completely deflated. That conversation definitely could have gone better. But then again, it also could have been worse. The boy was reeling and far more emotional than Aizawa had expected. But his thoughts lined up with what Hisashi and Aizawa had guessed the night before. Aizawa had at least been semi-prepared for how to deal with the thoughts of abandonment. Over an hour of the day had been taken up, which was relatively short compared to the time Aizawa had thought it would take to get through to the boy. Luckily, that meant they could probably get back home before dark. He had hoped Ectoplasm or Snipe would agree to spar with the brat for the day, but both had declined. Ectoplasm had patrol and Snipe was taking the for himself. It was perfectly reasonable, but it SCK when it came to the training plan. Hisashi had suggested a different idea. The kid would be upset and disappointed. Even after accepting the explanation, he would probably still be reeling. Disappointment was a major part of hero work, though, and this could be used as a learning opportunity. It could also be used to show that others had it worse. But the important thing was to not lose hope. Ida Tensei had called Hisashi 2 days prior, and both men had wanted to visit their old friend, now that he was up to seeing visitors. After a call to the hospital, Ida had graciously accepted having Izuku come as well. Ida knew about the brat. He knew his struggles, and he understood the point of Aizawa bringing him along. The man was probably too good for this world, if Aizawa was being honest. If positions had been SWCH, Aizawa wouldn't have wanted to be used as a lesson for some kid hoping to be the very thing that he could never be again. And yet, Tensei had been the one to bring the idea up before Aizawa even had a chance to ask. The moment Izuku was mentioned, Tensei had requested he be brought in. He insisted the boy could learn a thing or two from the experience, and Aizawa had agreed. It wasn't exactly the lesson plan he had in mind for the week, but it would be fine for the day. Ectoplasm could take over sparring tomorrow. Kid, if you're up for it, I plan to take a little trip today. I hoped you'd come along. Izuku was still standing by the hole in the wall he had created. He'd have to scold him later for acting out in his anger in such a way, but now was not the time. He wanted to be calm. He wanted the kid to be calm. Okay? Is that a yes? I'm not gonna force you to come. But this is what I planned in lieu of sparring. Yeah, that's fine. He sounded robotic. Probably still processing. Go get dressed then. A nod. And then he turned and left the room. You are seriously gonna go see Ida after that? Kayama whispered. We knew he wouldn't like the news. He did no more than I expected. Shouldn't you be grounding him for that behavior? Not this time, Aizawa deadpanned. Like I said, I expected it. Where are we going, anyway? Deku asked. He, Aizawa-sensei and Yamade-sensei were on a train heading towards Tokyo. He hadn't even bothered to question where they were taking him until now, having been lost in his thoughts. Tokyo Hero Hospital, Yamade-sensei said softly. Deku tensed. Why? To meet an old friend, Aizawa-sensei supplied. Deku shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't like hospitals. He didn't know anyone who liked hospitals unless they worked in one, actually. Hospitals were cold, sad. Hospitals are where psych wards are. An old friend? Who? He was suspicious. He'd flipped out on them today. It could be a trick, even if he desperately wanted to believe it wasn't. Aizawa-sensei sighed, leaning his head back against the seat. We aren't lying to you, brat. We are going to see a friend. Why won't you tell me who? Another sigh. It's Ida Tensei. Izuku stilled at the name, looking down at his hands in his lap. Ida's older brother. Yes. I didn't know you knew him. We went to school together, little listener. Oh, Ida Tensei. Ingenium. His quirk is engine, similar to his brother's. He was attacked by Stain. He is friends with Aizawa-sensei and Yamade-sensei. Izuku's gut twists uncomfortably in his stomach. It's always different when it's personal. The hospital was small, but extremely well-equipped. Hero injuries tended to be more severe. But since there were no civilian patients, space was not a necessity. A nurse showed the trio to a room on the second floor. Izuku hesitated outside the door as Yamade-sensei and Aizawa-sensei greeted the man in the bed. Tensei held striking resemblance to his brother, but the relaxed way he spoke made it clear the two were quite different. He was sitting up in the hospital bed, hands in his lap and a gentle smile on his face. His voice was soft, but held an air of authority. He had a few bandages wrapped around his head, and some poked out under the hospital gown. Enrollment 4 drip was connected to his left arm and a heart monitor was firmly placed on a finger of the same hand. Izuku's own hands were sweating, his heart rate picking up. It's always different when it's personal. He shook his head clear of the thought right as Yamade-sensei beckoned him into the room encouragingly. Tensei's eyes met his own and softened just slightly. Hello, I'm Ida Tensei. I hear you are in the same class as my brother. Izuku noted, tongue as heavy as lead in his mouth. It's nice to meet you. The man said, a smile spreading on his face. I never thought Aizawa and Yamada would be the first of our group to end up with a child. He laughed. The sound was loud, but his voice was rich and soothing. Izuku flinched back. Sorry, Tensei said quickly, softly. Kid, you all right? Aizawa-sensei asked. Izuku nodded slowly, keeping back near the far wall of the room. He's safe, little listener. It's okay. Izuku nodded again. He knew Ida Tensei was safe. He was a hero. Heroes, most of them, at least, were good. He wasn't afraid of heroes. He was afraid of the past. Izuku closed his eyes, taking a steadying breath before opening them again. He was fine. No one knew. No one had to know. Why was this suddenly so strong? What was going on? He's been fine all of the other times. The difference was that this was face-to-face. The difference was that people he knew and loved cared about the person in front of him. It's always different when it's personal. Push past it. He was being ridiculous. Open your mouth and speak, you moron. Izuku started. Hi. Tensei's smile brightened. Hi, Izuku. A mumble was better than nothing. You can call me Tensei since you know my brother. Izuku shifted uncomfortably. Are you okay? Hurt. I'm not in any pain. I wouldn't have visitors if I was. Ida. Ah, your brother is the class rep. Small talk was not Izuku's strong suit. Aizawa-sensei seemed to agree. Based on the small snort of laughter he tried and failed to suppress. I know. He called me immediately after school when he was chosen, Tensei said with a laugh. He told me you were in the running too. I'm not in the H-Hero course full-time. But you want to be, yes? Izuku nodded. I'm trying. Training. You know, it isn't easy, being a hero. I know. Deku narrowed his eyes at the man. If Tensei even hinted at the idea that he was weaker for not having a quirk, he would regret it. You could get hurt. I know, Deku huffed out. You still want to be one. Even if your injuries could change your life forever. Izuku took a breath. This wasn't about being quirkless. This was about Tensei. Do you regret becoming a hero? Izuku asked back. Tensei's smile changed just slightly, taking on a forlorn air. I am paralyzed from the waist down. My only regret is that I won't be able to save more people. I will never regret what I have done. What I chose. Would you, if you were hurt like me? Izuku paused, thinking. This question deserved serious thought. It was not asked lightly. It was not asked for simple curiosity. It had a purpose, and Izuku made sure to show the questioner the respect he deserved by thinking through his answer. If I got badly hurt from hero work, I think I would only regret my own failures. Choosing to be a hero, that isn't a failure. It's a strength. Tensei nodded. Would you regret the other things? The man asked. The suffering you cause your loved ones, the burden you would place on others. Do you? Sometimes, yes. Izuku stepped towards the bed. Aizawa-sensei and Yamada-sensei were standing quietly, watching the interaction intently. I'm already a burden. And yes, I regret that a lot, Izuku whispered. But I don't think it would be TTO different. Aizawa-sensei says I'm already a HH handful. Tensei barked out a laugh at the reply. Aizawa-sensei rolled his eyes and Yamada-sensei chuckled into his own hand. Izuku didn't really get the joke. You seem like a good kid, Tensei said happily, resting back against his pillow. You don't even know me, Izuku murmured. I'm a good judge of character. Aizawa, what a pick. I'll say it again, who would have thought you two would be the first to have a child? I'm not their kid, Izuku whispered, hands FSTNG at the hem of his shirt. Maybe not legally, Tensei said. But they view you as their own. Don't let Shota's gruff nature fool you. He adores you, kiddo. I think your meds are making you high, Tensei. Aizawa-sensei drawled. They took me off pain meds 2 days ago. This is just fluids, the man responded brightly. Aizawa-sensei, Yamada-sensei, and Tensei chatted for about 20 more minutes after that. The three seemed comfortable in each other's presence, and the atmosphere was relaxed. Izuku settled himself in the chair by the wall. Tensei was a good person. He seemed genuine and kind. It made no sense. It made no sense why he was attacked. It didn't line up with Stain's ideals. It didn't match the normal victims. Stain didn't attack people for no reason. It's why Izuku hadn't said anything. It didn't make sense. Why were you attacked? The words were out of Izuku's mouth before he could stop them. The light-hearted tone in the room immediately vanished. Deku scratched at the back of his neck before meeting Tensei's eyes again. You don't line up with the typical victims. When I looked you up, you had no history of abusing your power. I don't understand why Stain attacked you. I spoke out against Stain's philosophy. I actively sought out to stop him. That's why I was targeted. At least, that is what the police think. But, that... Deku stopped his mouth before he gave away too much. Are you mad at him? If you had the choice, would you kill him? He was searching for a reason. Any reason that Stain would harm the man before him. No. Criminals deserve a fair trial. The same as you or me. I don't wish death on him even if I am angry. FCK. This wasn't right. Ida Tensei should not have been attacked. He should not have been targeted. This was a mistake. Stain made a mistake. One more serious than killing criminal heroes. Because this hero was innocent, and he had ruined a good man. It wasn't fair. I'm sorry. He was saying too much. It's not like you were the one with the sword. Izuku. No need to apologize. I might as well have had the sword. Way too much. He should stop. It might have been a fluke. Stain wouldn't attack another innocent again. But what if he does? What do you mean? Tensei's eyebrows were knitting together, the same as the two teachers in the room. I knew. Stop now. Feign confusion. Izuku, what are you talking about? Yamada-sensei asked softly. I know who Stain is. I know his quirk. I know his whereabouts. I know his most probably victims and have known since he started killing. I know his strengths and weaknesses. I knew. And I didn't say anything. And now you're hurt. An innocent person is hurt because I didn't say anything, so I'm sorry. The following silence was deafening. This police station looked exactly the same as the one in Musutafu. The only difference was the words sprawled across the wall. Hasu. Hasu Police Station. Not Musutafu Police Station. Even the receptionist carried the same dull look bored out of his mind from the slow night. That's what happened when heroes took over most cases. The room Deku was sitting in was an exact replica of the one back home. The same table. The same floors. The same ceiling. Well, the other ceiling has a scuff from when Deku had escaped through the vents one time after being captured. But it was mostly the same. The place was cold, both in temperature and in overall aura. White and gray left nothing for the eye to focus on. Painfully bland. He'd hoped to never see this room again. He probably shouldn't hope for things. They never happen. Aizawa-sensei was just outside the door, talking to Tsukachi, most likely. The detective had been in town to help with the Stain cases. It was the only reason they hadn't gone to the main station in Musutafu. They needed his quirk. Lie detector. They didn't trust Deku to tell them the truth. They were angry. Or Aizawa-sensei was angry. Yamada-sensei was sad. Disappointed. The look he gave Deku in the hospital room had been full of shock before quickly morphing to a more forlorn look when Aizawa-sensei stormed out the room without a word. Aizawa-sensei hadn't spoken a word to Deku, except to tell him that they were headed to the police station. He hadn't looked in Deku's direction. He hadn't acknowledged Deku's words. So this was the breaking point. This is what it took to make him give up on Deku, on Izuku. Deku curled into himself in the corner of the room. He hadn't even attempted the uncomfortable chair by the table. He didn't deserve it. He had hurt his guardians, made them upset. He had betrayed Sensei. He had messed up in more ways than he could probably see. But he had been trying to do the right thing. He should probably stop trying to do the right thing, too. It always ended up badly in the end. Midoriya, Tsukachi greeted as soon as the door cracked open. I wish I could say it was nice to see, but considering the circumstances under which Aizawa brought you in. Deku didn't reply, tucking his head further into his arms. I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer me honestly, Tsukachi said as he took a seat at the table. Deku stayed in his corner. Did you tell Aizawa, Yamada, and Ida Tensei that you had information on Stain that the police may or may not have? Silence. Talk to him, brat. Izuku jolted, looking up at Aizawa-sensei with wide eyes. Why was he in here? Aizawa-sensei was leaning against the wall on the far side of the room, arms folded as he gazed at Izuku. His face was expressionless, his breathing even. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. I shouldn't be. Aizawa-sensei sighed heavily and held up a hand. His movements were fluid but tense. Angry. He had to be angry. No, kid. You should have said something the moment you were brought into custody. The moment you trusted us. Maybe even after class on the day we discussed Stain. Any other time before now would have been better. You should have spoken up sooner. People are dead, Midoriya. Izuku flinched at the name. Since when did Aizawa-sensei call him something so formal? I'm sorry. Sorry isn't always enough. I don't know what you want me to say. I don't know how to make you happy. This isn't about me being happy. The words were said in the same monotonous voice, but Izuku imagined a raging bull when he heard them. Roman 2 told you. I told you now. I never lied. I never. You never said anything. I couldn't. Why not? Aizawa-sensei, please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Do you want to make me happy? Izuku paused, breath catching in his throat. Yes. He wanted Aizawa-sensei to be happy. He wanted Aizawa-sensei to love him again. To want him again. Yes. Then go sit at the table and answer the detective's questions. In full. Then maybe I'll be in a better mood. Izuku stood shakily, moving to the table and sitting in the strong metal chair quickly. The sides of the back of the chair dug into his back uncomfortably as he sat as still as possible. He tried to make himself as non-threatening as possible, as small and meek as he could to show the two men in the room that he was listening. He wasn't being disobedient. He was trying so strong. I suppose the first question is, what do you know about Stain? Stain. This was about Stain. This was about his sensei. His first sensei. He wanted Aizawa sensei to be happy, but could he give this away? Could he betray sensei like this, after all he had done when Izuku was on the street? You're gonna need to be more specific, Deku ultimately said, relaxing his tense muscles and leaning back in the seat. Fake it. He needed to fake it. He'd done this hundreds of times before. He needed to close himself off, not feel. At least, not feel the Izuku emotions. Tsukachi sat up straighter at the change, eyes focusing in on Deku as if to study the boy. Answer the question. Aizawa sensei snapped. Izuku screamed in the back of Deku's mind. Begged him to listen. Deku would let the Izuku side break down later. He needed to protect himself. He couldn't let the icy tone and cold glares break him down. Erasure wanted to be in, but Deku could be won back. His terms. He would make Eraser leave on his terms. He wouldn't beg the man to stay. He wasn't weak. I did. I told him to be more specific, Deku replied. His hand shook in his lap. The room seemed to grow colder as Aizawa sensei stared. Tsukachi cleared his throat. Do you have a name, a quirk, an age? Anything we can use to identify Stain and get an idea of how to capture him? Yes, I do. Tsukachi cleared his throat again when Deku didn't hand the information over immediately. Then, please give me that information. Why? So that you can take him in. I'm not a traitor. I won't betray him. He's killing people, Aizawa sensei growled. Good people. Heroes, Deku. Oh, so it's Deku now, is it? What happened to calling me Midoriya? Give up on that power play already? His soul broke at his own words. He was dying inside. Cut the attitude. Go FCK yourself, Erasure. Why are you even here? You think that I will just roll over like some FC King dog? You don't know sit. Better to break this way. Better to have it over with. It was always coming. They were always going to turn on him. Always going to hate him in the end. Where is this coming from? Oh, I don't know. You tell me. It's not like you have to stick around and deal with me after this. Just FC King leave if you want to. What the hell, kid? Aizawa sensei's voice rose that time. Deku stood from the chair, taking a step away. How many times do I have to tell you that I'm not going to leave, for you to get it through your head? I'm staying and you're stuck with me whether you like it or not. No words came to him this time. No snarky comment or sly response. Deku searched his teacher's face, trying to find a lie in the features for the second time in a day. You're mad. A statement. No harm can come from a statement. Of course I'm mad, Aizawa sensei growled. But I'm mad at myself for not catching this sooner. I'm more frustrated at you. Disappointed. Irritated. That doesn't change the fact that you are still mine. What if I don't say anything? What if I don't tell you anything you want to know? That would change it, wouldn't it? Then you won't want me. Then you won't. Yes, I will. Aizawa sensei cut him off. That makes no sense. Neither does keeping the identity of Stain a secret. A PRGNT silence enveloped the room as the two stared one another down. Deku lost the battle of the wills, looking away from the intense gaze of his guardian. If I give him away, I'll be betraying him. I'll be betraying the only other person who cared for me other than you. I can't. He has killed 17 heroes and crippled 23 others. He plans to do more. You can't tell me that is someone who is worth protecting. You don't know him. Then explain him to me. He was my sensei. He was the only one, before you, who gave a DMN about me. Everything was cold. The air, the wind, the rain. Izuku's bones felt like ice as he trudged through puddles forming in the potholes of the forgotten section of city. The cold was an issue, even more so because it was May and the temperature was 22°C, about 72°F according to the news. A fever. He could not deal with a fever right now. He needed to find shelter. He needed to find high ground. His normal sleeping area might as well be a swimming pool for young children at this point with the ankle-deep water. It wasn't safe to sleep there. He'd get sick, FCK. He was sick. What now? High ground. He needed high ground and roof over his head, so he could stay dry and try to sleep the fever off. It was so strong to walk, though. His legs shook, hell, his whole body shook. His head ached, a PND like he had never experienced. A hammer jamming a nail into his forehead would have felt more comfortable. Everything ached. He was pretty sure his hair was in pain by this point. But he had to keep moving. Keep moving. There was an abandoned building somewhere to the north. If he could just get there, just reach it. But the world was blurring, and his vision was growing dark. He didn't even feel himself hit the ground. Izuku woke with a start, hands flying up in front of him defensively, as if to fend off the dream attacker. His breath LBR and sweat formed a puddle in the sheets under him. His vision spotted as BLD rushed away from his head from the sudden change of direction. But he forced himself to stay conscious. Something wasn't right. Something wasn't. Sheets. Why were there sheets under him? Why was it soft? Finally awake, a rough voice sounded from the right. Izuku jumped, moving as far from the sound as he could, and ultimately falling out of the bed and onto a dust-covered floor. He scrambled back further, his back ultimately pressing against a stone wall that sent a chill down his back. Sit, kid. If your first instinct is to corner yourself, you're never gonna survive. Izuku's heart was going to beat out of his sane. He was going to have a heart attack. A DMN heart attack at 12. If that didn't kill him, then this stranger certainly would. WHWH, who are you? Names hold power. I ain't giving you any over me. Izuku jerked his head in a nod, showing he understood. WHYMIHH here. WH what DDDOUW want with MME? Better to know in advance. If the man told the truth, at least Izuku wouldn't feel too terrible about kicking him in the nuts when he approached. As if you'd believe me if I told you. The voice snarled. Izuku backed further into the wall, trying to help himself stand, but finding his legs to be too weak to hold his weight. A drug, maybe? You should lay back down. You're still feverish. Fat chance at that. If cornering himself was a bad move, getting back on that bed was even worse. He wasn't going to put himself in a position to be taken advantage of. How'd I get here? What'd you DDO? The voice now had a face as the man walked over to Izuku from another part of the room. The man was scraggly, thin, and unkempt. His sharp features looked even more angled in the pitiful light, casting dark shadows over his red eyes. His nose was clearly skewed, as if having been broken multiple times. It looked painful, but that wasn't an abnormal sight to see in this part of town. You were passed out in the storm. I brought you up here. Probably shouldn't be considering how ungrateful you're acting, he said, before turning around and mumbling loudly to himself. Little sit, acting like it may hurt him. Shoulda left well enough alone. Thank you, Izuku quickly said in response to the grumbles. I didn't mean to act ungrateful. Just. Thighs isn't the best situation to find yourself in, usually. If you weren't so pathetic, maybe you wouldn't be needed me. Take better care of yourself. People round here don't need your dead body, making the street reek more than it already does. The man said as he turned back to face Izuku. Alright. WL. I guess I'm gonna GGO. Bull. You can't even stand, you little sit. Lay down on the FC-kin bed. This time, since there really was no other option with the man leering over him, Izuku obeyed. Unfortunately, wanting to listen and his body actually listening were two different things. When he tried to stand once more, his knees merely gave out. The man barked a laugh, reaching down and grabbing Izuku by the forearm and practically tossing him to the mattress. Izuku yelped at the physical contact, his body burning and his mind whiting out. His muscles tensed and his eyes slammed shut in preparation for hits, or worse. But none landed. When Izuku chanced peeking an eye open, he was met with the man glaring at him from across the room. His body was shaking uncontrollably as he slowly sat up and eyed the stranger back, warily. Sleep. The fever won't go away till you do. I won't FC-kin touch ya. Kids aren't my thing. Izuku forced himself to stay awake as long as he could. But eventually, his illness won out, and the darkness claimed him once more. When he next awoke, his fever had broken and the man was gone. Izuku wasn't stupid enough to stick around, choosing to escape through a window, lest he run into the man on his way out the building. For 3 days, he saw no sign of the stranger. For 3 days, Izuku went about his routine: sign language classes, self-defense, study at the library, patrol the area, and help anyone who looked to need it. Walking old women home and getting cats down from trees saved up a lot of time for the police to do the stronger things around the area. It was the best Izuku could hope to do without delving into illegal territory. Izuku was happy to be of use, too. Unfortunately, when a kid wanders around these parts late at night, trouble is bound to find him. He had just settled in on the slide of the worn-down playground. It was cozy enough to sleep in most nights. Unfortunately, some teens thought Izuku to be trespassing. Trespassers had to pay. Izuku had gone mute, to his wonderful luck, unable to even scream as the 3 teens beat at him. He tried to block, to dodge, to run, but none of the moves taught at the self-defense class seemed to be of much use against the 3 older boys who were gleefully kicking the shit out of him. A punch to the gut had Izuku on the ground. Kicks landed on his sides and back and aimed for his head, of which Izuku covered with his arms. Just as suddenly as the teens had begun messing with him, they stopped. Screams filled the night air, and Izuku heard someone running away. One of the boys fell before Izuku, eyes wide and scared, a small nick of a knife cut in his cheek. He was limp, but conscious. Izuku slowly looked up, only to red eyes glaring down at him, and an outstretched hand waiting for him to grab on. Izuku didn't touch it, raising from the dirt on his own. "Friends of yours?" Izuku looked at the man cautiously, backing up a step and preparing to flee should something happen. The boy at his feet looked up at him in fear, and Izuku sighed, as he realized he would never forgive himself if he left the teen with some lunatic, even if the other boy had just been beating on him. "You block for sit, kid. Where'd you learn those pitiful moves? Free community classes?" Izuku hesitated only a moment before slowly nodding his head. The stranger snorted in response, shaking his head. "Of F-seeking course." The man took a step forward and Izuku jerked back. He wasn't fast enough to stop the man from grabbing onto him. Izuku's entire body tensed as he was pulled towards the stranger. "Get into a defensive position. Now." Izuku hesitated, only to have his knees kicked, landing him on the ground once again. "You wouldn't be in the dirt if you did what I asked. Get up and get in a defensive position." Izuku glanced at the boy to his side before slowly getting up and doing as told. Better to keep the crazy dude happy until the other teen could at least move. "Lower your center of gravity. Make sure you're blocking the vital sections of your gut. And sit, kid. If you're gonna make a fist, at least make one where if you punch someone, you won't break your FC kig thumb. You need those." Izuku flinched every time the man grabbed at him to correct his stance, but ultimately listened to the words. Thus far, other than being more physical than Izuku was comfortable with, the man hadn't done anything dangerous. Once Izuku was in the right position, however, that changed. In a flash, a fist was aimed for his face. Izuku backtracked quickly, stumbling over his feet and landing on his butt in the dirt for the 3rd time in the last 10 minutes. The FCK. Just block with your arms next time. If you were in the right stance, you wouldn't be fallen over. Now get back up and try again, you little sit. Izuku did as told, albeit much more shakily this time. However, when the punch came, Izuku held up his arms, blocking it. His arm smarted from where it had been hit, but he was still standing. Despite his small stature, the heavy blow hadn't knocked him back. Seems the stance had some merit, after all. The man looked satisfied as well, a smirk stretching across his features. "You're a quick study. Next time someone tries to FCK with you, at least you'll be able to buy yourself some time to run without falling on your butt." With that, the man turned and left without another word. The next time Izuku saw the man, he had just finished getting yet another cat out from a tree. Small wounds lined his arms from where the ungrateful feline had scratched and bit at him on the journey down. Beat up by a cat. Izuku flinched at the voice, turning to look into the alley where the man stood, leaning against the wall. "Just keep walking. Keep walking and maybe, eventually, you will be left alone. Except, When Izuku turned to walk away, the man merely followed, quickly catching up to match Izuku's pace. You just do that simple CRP all day? What are you, some glorified baby policeman? Izuku's hands fisted in his oversized t-shirt. Unable to speak again. Figures. This was a man, and he was scary. To top it off, Izuku was completely alone as well. There were no social workers to help out when you chose to be homeless. What, the cat got your tongue too? The man asked. Izuku flinched again, coming to stop and turning towards the stranger. He glared up at the man with as much confidence as he could muster, only to be met with a contemplative stare. You're tiny, thin. You hungry? Izuku did not expect that question, his glare dropping from his features instantly in exchange for a look of surprise. The surprise only grew when the man took out a steamed meat bun, still sealed in its bag as proof that it wasn't tampered with. Izuku's hands twitched towards the bag, only to draw back quickly, looking up at the man skeptically. What was it that the man wanted in exchange? No one gave out food for free. Still an ungrateful little cit, aren't you? Take the DMN food. You're half-starved. Izuku opened his mouth, willing for sound to come out. Only a small squeak met his ears. The man huffed in amusement, pushing the bagged bun into his CHC. Izuku sighed, simply accepting the gesture and opening the bag when the temptation became too much to resist. His mouth watered instantly at the sweet smell of mostly fresh food. It was glorious, and Izuku downed the bun in under a minute, not wasting a crumb. He signed a quick thanks out of habit when he finished. So you can sign, then. Good. That makes things easier. Izuku looked up slowly, seeking his head to the side in question. What did this dude want? USCK at survival. I'm gonna help you out. Why? Izuku signed slowly, uncertain if he should even hear the crazy man out. 'Cause I see a bit of myself in you. Izuku snorted. You don't even know me. I've been watching you for weeks, you little cit. Long before you passed out. Izuku tensed, shoulders going up to his ears as he took a step away. Don't get your panties in a twist. I look out for everyone here. I protect people. It's my job, in a way. When a kid starts wandering around trying to get all up in other people's business, it's my business to make sure they aren't sketchy. And you aren't. You're just naive and good-hearted, two things that are gonna get you killed. I'm not dead yet. You're welcome for that, too. You really think you would have survived that fever without me? The least you can do is let me teach you how to survive so my strong work doesn't go to waste. I've been on my own for a year. And I've been on my own for 20 years. You ain't special. Izuku huffed, a scowl forming on his face. This guy wasn't gonna give up, was he? Insane. The dude was insane. Meet me here tomorrow. I'll bring you some more food, at least. Izuku rolled his eyes, moving to turn away at the clear dismissal. Wait. Izuku turned back. The FCK you want me to call you, you little cit. Izuku thought for a moment before slowly bringing his hands up and signing. I thought names had power. Why do you think I'd give you any over me? His reply was only met with a snort and a small smirk before the man walked away. For 2 weeks, the man brought Izuku food and talked to him. A few times, he showed him some basic defensive moves in case he got attacked. Izuku didn't see that happening considering the guy followed him anytime he went out after dark. Anyway, it was like having a stalker, or a guardian angel, who could really tell at this point. At long last, Izuku finally gave in. Fine. You can't teach me how to survive. The man merely grinned, and motioned for Izuku to follow. Why would you keep going back to him if you found him unnerving? Tsukachi asked, writing notes onto the pad in front of him. He fed me. I was hungry. Haven't you ever heard of stranger danger? Deku snorted. Aizawa-sensei sighed, rubbing his temples. If you thought he was creepy, you should have called the police. I couldn't. They would have put me back in care. Besides, he is a good person, like I said. He didn't hurt me or anything. He fed me, housed me, trained me. He stalked you. Aizawa-sensei growled. So did you? Deku said with a wave of his hand. I was making sure you were taken care of. Aizawa-sensei said, turning to look Deku in the eye. Deku sat up straighter, accepting the challenge. He had to understand. He had to. Stain wasn't bad. So was he. I'm a hero, brat. Deku scoffed. As if being a hero made a difference. He was close enough to one. He's killed people, Aizawa-sensei said with a sigh. Deku sighed as well, looking down at his hands on the table before muttering back his reply. So have you.